The Nile, my mother. I drank the water of life with him, making a pact in memory, never to forget this life. This is the promise made by a girl brought back through time to the supreme pharaoh of ancient Egypt. Many people, knowing their ending isn't perfect, still can't help but revisit their story again and again. Some have fallen in love with Egypt because of their story. Some even vow to visit Egypt at least once in their lifetime, just to witness Ivy and Bifitu's promise, a love story that transcends millennia in a vast desert. The story is based on the novel Pharaoh's Concubine and adapted into the comic Shark, Song of the Sea. Today is Ivy's 17th birthday. Her brother, Aiden, has prepared a special birthday gift for her. As expected, Ivy, who loves antiques, is overjoyed with the gift before her. It's a Book of the Dead, buried with a mummy, and remarkably well preserved. Aiden knew his sister had been researching Egypt recently, so he traveled all over the country, spending nearly 2 months preparing these gifts. But what he didn't know was that Ivy wasn't researching Egyptian history. She only knew about Pharaoh Ramses II. He was the ruler of the last prosperous period of the ancient Egyptian dynasties, with hundreds of wives and over 100 children. Yet in that patriarchal era, a statue of one wife stood beside him in the temple. Her name was Nefertari. Legend has it she was the most beautiful and intelligent woman of that time. Ivy didn't pay much attention to the name, simply thinking it was a bit long. She playfully asked her brother if there would be a reward for remembering the name, since it was her birthday and one ancient manuscript wasn't enough. Aiden gestured for his sister to come closer. He took out an exquisite serpentine gold bracelet and personally put it on her wrist. It was said to be a gift from Ramses II to his most beloved woman. Ivy was immediately captivated by the mysterious bracelet, just as she was engrossed in admiring it. A strange red glow flickered in the ruby eyes. Before she could figure out what was happening, her brother's next words made her lose the ability to think clearly. Aiden was getting married in 3 months. The bride was Mina, the daughter of an American oil tycoon. After the wedding, he would move to the United States to expand his business. Aiden, as the heir to the renowned Marquis of Mortier, was not only young, but had also become the king of the British financial center with his exceptional business acumen. His tall and handsome appearance had always made him popular with girls. Ivy hated being his sister. Yes, she loved her brother. She knew this feeling was wrong, but she couldn't control her emotions anymore. Tears of sadness streamed from her eyes. One tear happened to fall onto the serpentine bracelet. The next moment, the serpent's body suddenly emitted a dazzling golden light. A strange red glow emanated from the eyes again. The bracelet seemed to come alive, opening its mouth. Then, an even stronger light enveloped Ivy's entire body. In terror, Aiden kept calling Ivy's name and tried to hold her. But when the light faded, Ivy had disappeared before his eyes. At the same moment, the Book of the Dead behind Aiden began to glow. Ancient text appeared on it. What Aiden didn't know was that the text meant, everything makes you lost in time and space. A promise brings you back to his side. The year is 2007. The appearance of a novel became a perpetual heartache for many. Pharaoh's Concubine depicts a millennial love story under the ancient Egyptian sky. The novel is divided into 3 parts. The first part, Wings Spread Wild, is the basis for the comic Shark, Song of the Sea. On Ivy's 17th birthday, a mysterious serpentine bracelet sends her to Pharaoh Ramses. In a vast desert, Ivy was dreaming of cuddling with her brother when she was suddenly awakened by some unusual movements. The moment Ivy opened her eyes, an unfamiliar red-haired man appeared before her. He was patting her down, checking for weapons. Ivy screamed, startled by the sight. Another strange, masked man immediately apologized to Ivy. Although it was a strange language she'd never heard before, Ivy somehow understood what they were saying. The red-haired man was called Mintus, and the masked man was called Rita. They were curious as to why a girl like Ivy was in the desolate desert. It was then that Ivy realized she wasn't in her hometown of London, but in another country thousands of miles away, Egypt. Just moments ago, she should have been celebrating her birthday with her brother Aiden, discussing Pharaoh Ramses II and his concubine, Nefertari. Ivy muttered to herself, lost in these thoughts. Unexpectedly, Rita mistook Nefertari for Ivy's name, praising it as very Egyptian and suiting her. Before Ivy could explain, Rita suddenly made a request. But Ivy, preoccupied with getting home, didn't want to deal with them. She stood up and looked around, trying to find the direction of an airport. Impatient and ignoring Rita's objections, Mintis threw Ivy over his shoulder without a word. He had taken a liking to Ivy's rare blonde hair and blue eyes, declaring that she was their best choice. Rita quickly tried to appease Ivy, saying that if she accompanied them to a banquet tonight, they would send her home tomorrow. Without waiting for Ivy's agreement, Mintis tossed her onto his mount. In the blink of an eye, a majestic city appeared before Ivy. She couldn't believe her eyes. To say this was Egypt, it looked more like ancient Egypt. Mintis looked at Ivy with a puzzled expression. Had she never even heard of Thebes, the capital of Egypt? Ivy was completely shocked. Thebes, one of the oldest cities in the world, lost to the tide of history, was a renowned testament to ancient Egypt's grandeur. The terrifying facts laid out before her made Ivy finally realize she had traveled through time to a world thousands of years in the past. Worse, she might never return to the present. Before she could process the situation, two handmaidens forcibly took her away. A modern girl triggered the power of a mysterious bracelet and accidentally traveled to ancient Egypt 3,000 years in the past. As soon as Ivy opened her eyes, she encountered two strange men. They forcibly brought her to Thebes, the capital of ancient Egypt. Each man invited her to attend a banquet. Ivy overheard that both men were the pharaoh's most trusted subordinates. One was a renowned young general who commanded a large army and had achieved great military exploits fighting alongside the pharaoh. The other was a royal seer, only 19 years old, who had already become the high priest of the great temple. Ivy still couldn't believe this was really ancient Egypt. The handmaidens were clearly getting impatient with Ivy's questions. One of them rudely ripped off Ivy's headscarf. The two handmaidens were immediately stunned by Ivy's blonde hair and blue eyes. They instantly knelt, apologizing for their ignorance and promising to make Ivy the most beautiful girl at the banquet. As night fell, the banquet officially began. The man holding a girl in his arms, looking smug and pleased, was General Tada. He was always the most spirited one at these events. This was the 5th such banquet this year. It was said the prince had specifically sought out dozens of beautiful girls to accompany the guests. General Tada, while outwardly enjoying himself with a playful smile, secretly mocked the prince as an incompetent and hedonistic ruler. Just then, the announcement of His Highness has arrived rang out. The girls present stared at the entrance, both shy and excited. Their Prince Bifitu had arrived. He had bronze skin and wore peacock green attire. His chiseled features and refined, prominent facial features exuded a regal aura tinged with a hint of playful nonchalance. The night granted by the gods is so beautiful. Where are the maidens blessed by the goddess Hathor? At Bifitu's urging, the girls slowly entered the main hall. The previously chaotic and noisy atmosphere transformed into a collective sigh. Ivy, in a light pink gauze gown, her distinctive blonde hair and blue eyes a striking contrast, embodied the Egyptians' favorite colors. She instantly became the center of attention. Even Mintis could hardly believe this was the same disheveled girl he'd found on the roadside. General Tada was the first to react, rushing towards Ivy with open arms and heavy breathing. Startled, Ivy stumbled backward, her foot catching on her dress. Just as she was about to fall, a strong pair of hands caught her. Ivy looked up to see a broad chest. Bifitu, holding her, said, "This prince hasn't had a beauty to accompany him for a drink yet. General Tada, perhaps you could find another." With that, Bifitu swept Ivy into his arms and carried her towards his throne. The English girl, unexpectedly transported to ancient Egypt 3,000 years in the past, with her unique blonde hair and blue eyes, became an instant sensation, capturing the heart of the pharaoh's son. With the prince's toast, the banquet officially began. However, the atmosphere felt strange to Ivy. Everyone crowded around General Tada, offering him drinks, while ignoring the prince. Did he hold no status in the palace? Mintis and Rita were also watching Tada. Ivy recalled the day they met. They had spoken of plans. Could they be plotting something? Suddenly, Ivy felt a cold gaze on her back. Turning, she felt as if it had been her imagination. Bifitu was merely looking at her with a slight smile, asking her name. His amber eyes were more intoxicating than wine. Lost in thought, Ivy gave the false name Nefertari. Bifitu seemed pleased with the name and with Ivy, motioning for her to sit beside him. It was then that Ivy realized she had been sitting on Bifid's lap. Blushing, she quickly moved to the side. Bifida then stood, as if about to make an important announcement. But the next moment, a wine glass shattered on the floor. With a swoosh, Mintus's blade flashed, and Tata slumped onto the table. At Mintus's command, soldiers stormed the hall, seizing the officials. It was a trap Bifida had laid for them. These officials had abused their power, exploiting the people and hoarding wealth. Some had even conspired with enemies, selling weapons. Bifitu ordered the ringleaders executed on the spot, the rest to be enslaved. Some protested, claiming they were the pharaoh's ministers and should be judged by him upon his return. Bifitu was unmoved. As the eldest son of the pharaoh, he had the authority to punish those disloyal to the pharaoh and the nation. Seeing no way out, one of the officials broke free and lunged at Bifitu with a knife. Bifitu swiftly drew his sword, easily piercing the man's chest. He had anticipated such resistance and merely smiled. Unable to bear the sight, Ivy rushed forward and pushed Bifitu away. But this didn't earn Bifitu's mercy. Attacking royalty was a grave offense. He calmly ordered the man's entire family executed. Afterwards, Bifitu urged everyone to continue drinking, as if nothing had happened. Ivy felt a wave of nausea. This man was ruthless. The fragility of life struck her. She fled, unable to stay a moment longer. A modern girl, unexpectedly transported to ancient Egypt, caught the eye of the pharaoh's son. Forced to be his drinking companion, she witnessed a bloody purge. Having never witnessed such brutality, Ivy ran, colliding with Rita. She demanded to know why he hadn't kept his promise to return her after the banquet. But having caught the prince's eye, she no longer had the freedom to leave. Bifitu embraced her from behind, asking where she wanted to go. Wasn't it better to stay and drink with him? Ivy's mind was filled with the image of Bifitu piercing the man's chest. Terrified, she cried out, wanting to go home, desperate to escape. She also warned Bifitu that if he did anything to her, her older brother would not let him off. Bifitu, as the son of the pharaoh, had never been threatened like this before. He kissed Ivy without a word, silencing her chattering lips. This was Ivy's treasured first kiss. Looking into Bifitu's amber eyes, Ivy felt more bewildered than afraid. Bifitu asked who her older brother was, and if he was a relative. Ivy then remembered that her brother was about to get married and move to America. Even if she returned now, there would be no close family left in her large house. She lowered her head sadly. Perhaps it didn't matter where she went, she would be alone. Bifitu affectionately stroked Ivy's head and asked why she still wanted to go back. If she hadn't figured it out yet, she should stay by his side. He picked up the despondent Ivy and said, "Do you know, when you came to this country, you already became the pharaoh's property. But I won't force you to do anything. Just stay by my side." For the next month, Ivy seemed to become Bifitu's caged canary. She gradually got used to it. Bifitu, like a curious child, pulled her along, asking her questions about everything. With food, clothing, and shelter provided, Ivy felt like she had the whole world, yet had nothing at all. And Bifitu still couldn't understand what Ivy was thinking. No matter how well he treated her, she still maintained a distant demeanor, as if they weren't in the same world. A modern girl travels through time to ancient Egypt 3,000 years ago. Because of her exceptional beauty, she catches the eye of an Egyptian prince. Ivy hated being kept as a caged bird, so she sought out Rita again. Ivy questioned him about when he would fulfill his promise. Rita had promised to send her home after the banquet, but now a month had passed. Rita feigned a look of just remembering. Then he put on a playful smile and asked Ivy, "Isn't it good here?" He went on, singing Bifitu's praises. But no matter how much Rita said, Ivy couldn't understand what was so good about the tyrannical prince. Then Rita deliberately changed the subject, saying he was busy with work. The farmers were rioting because of a bad harvest. However, Rita realized he had said things Ivy wouldn't understand. He apologized to Ivy, which seemed like mockery to her. In modern times, this was her area of academic expertise. Ivy subconsciously pointed out the problem. The farmers were rioting because they couldn't eat. Paying them to build infrastructure would solve it. By allocating some of the work originally meant for hired craftsmen and slaves to the farmers wouldn't riot from hunger, and the slaves wouldn't die from overwork. Ivy didn't realize how much her words had shocked Rita. She continued to talk about tax and revenue issues when Rita bowed slightly behind her. Ivy immediately realized Biffitu had arrived, followed by several ministers who had just finished a meeting with him. It seemed they had also heard what Ivy said. One of the ministers quickly approached Ivy, staring at her with sharp eyes. "Young lady, where did you hear those things?" Ivy quickly explained that in her country, people who understood these things were everywhere. She also took the opportunity to lie, saying that if they let her go back, she could introduce more intellectuals in this field. But the minister didn't seem to believe her. Ivy's exceptional beauty had already made them suspicious. Furthermore, the surrounding area was full of small, deceitful nations. At this moment, Biffidu stepped in front of Ivy. "She's my person. You don't need to ask any more questions." The minister, realizing his rudeness, hurriedly bowed and left. Biffidu told Ivy that what she had just said was Egyptian national policy. His father, who had been in power for many years, had implemented policies towards the farmers, ranging from initial suppression to later subsidies. Each approach had its pros and cons, but none had effectively solved the farmers' problems. Biffidu slowly approached Ivy and continued, "We have been exploring this for many years and have finally come up with the latest implementation plan, yet you easily outlined the entire thing." This further fueled Biffidu's infatuation with Ivy. He was now even less likely to let her go. A modern girl travels through millennia to ancient Egypt and casually reveals their long-researched national policy with her modern knowledge. Her already exceptional beauty, combined with her intelligence, further captivated the Egyptian prince. Biffidu decided to take Ivy as his first concubine during the Nile River Festival. This was a status countless girls dreamed of, but Ivy had no desire to be a princess. She cried out that she only wanted to go home, back to the home with her brother Cien. Consumed by jealousy, Biffidu punched a pillar behind Ivy. He couldn't help but want to meet this man named Cien. Biffidu forcefully pulled Ivy into his arms. He emphasized to her that this was Egypt, and he was the son of the pharaoh. Everything here, including Ivy, belonged to him. He told Ivy to await the day she would become his concubine, then turned and left. Several dozen days passed. Rita told Ivy that the next day would be the day the Nile River flooded. To thank the Nile River goddess for her blessings, a grand celebration would be held. Just as Rita was exclaiming about the greatness of Egypt, Ivy interrupted him and asked who the current pharaoh of Egypt was. This made Rita wonder where this young woman had come from. She didn't even know Pharaoh Seti I. Ivy only had a vague impression of the name Seti I, combining what Rita had said about using the Nile's water for construction projects. She tried to recall what period of Egyptian history this was. She immediately regretted not having studied history more diligently. Although Rita didn't know what Ivy was worrying about, he had to remind her that there was something more important to be concerned with. Tomorrow, the prince would announce that she was his first concubine. Ivy told Rita that she had initially been nervous about it, but then she figured it out. Since ancient times, marriage had been the best way for royalty to consolidate power. The pharaoh would certainly not agree to a nameless, common foreigner becoming a princess. Rita hadn't expected Ivy to be so self-aware, let alone the pharaoh's approval. The council of elders was already in an uproar. They warned Biffidu not to be blinded by his infatuation and to consider the country. With wars raging on all sides of Egypt, marrying a princess from a powerful neighboring country as soon as possible was the priority. Biffidu understood this, of course, but he felt that if he didn't marry Ivy quickly, she might disappear from his side at any moment. Therefore, Biffidu insisted on taking Ivy as his concubine no matter what. However, he also chose to heed some of the others' advice and would reconsider the timing and manner of marrying Ivy. A beautiful young woman accidentally traveled to ancient Egypt because of a snake-shaped bracelet. The pharaoh's son fell in love with her at first sight and insisted on marrying her no matter what. This gave Ivy a huge headache. She tried to escape from the palace several times, but was caught by soldiers before even making it out of the corridor. She really didn't want to be the pharaoh's concubine. They shouldn't have any connection. He was a symbol carved on the pyramids 3,000 years later, and she was just a modern person who had stumbled into this time. Ivy looked at the rising Nile river below, thinking that jumping in might be a way to escape. At that moment, a large hand reached out from behind and embraced her. Biffidu nervously said that Ivy was his and that she should be responsible for her actions and to him. Ivy blushed and immediately denied being his. Biffidu stopped arguing and told her he had personally visited the labor market. The situation was just as Ivy had predicted. Many farmers were willing to work in the labor market during the dry season. Now, not only was the farmer's problem solved, but the completion of the pyramid could also be brought forward. Speaking of the pyramid, Ivy also wanted to see how it was built. Was it true, as legend had it, that they used earthen ramps to move the stones up? Bifida looked at Ivy, who was lost in thought again. He picked her up. He wanted to know what she was thinking. He also wanted to know who she really was. Why was she so different? And when she mentioned the man named Cien, the loneliness and sadness in her eyes made Bifitu extremely uncomfortable, yet he couldn't bear to see her sad. Unconsciously, he yearned to be the person in Ivy's heart. Bifida took out a gleaming golden object and gave it to Ivy. It was the snake-shaped gold bracelet that had brought her to ancient Egypt. This was a unique bracelet that Bifitu had specially made for her. In Egypt, the snake is a supreme symbol. By wearing it, Ivy would be marked as Bifitu's. But Ivy didn't hear a word of Bifitu's affectionate speech. Her mind was preoccupied with the thought that since the bracelet had brought her to this ancient time, perhaps wearing it again would allow her to return home, back to her brother Cien. Beneath the magnificent Sphinx, the people of ancient Egypt were celebrating the annual Nile River Festival. Earthquake-like cheers filled the air. For the first time, Ivy truly experienced the grandeur of ancient Egypt. She also realized how deeply loved Bifitu was by the people. On this auspicious day, Pharaoh said, "I arranged a marriage for Bifitu." Ivy knew this was the best and most normal outcome. Bifitu would become the supreme pharaoh and marry a noble princess. And she, by wearing the bracelet, could return to Cien's side, ending this absurd situation. But the promises Bifitu had made to her kept surfacing in her mind. Ivy put away the bracelet and ran towards the banquet hall. She hadn't yet realized her own feelings. She was simply very curious about what kind of wife Bifida would marry. This slightly plump woman, wobbling as she walked, was Princess Lenita of Libya. Bifitu frowned slightly. The pharaoh, seemingly oblivious to Princess Lenita's ball-like figure, casually assigned her to his eldest son as his second wife. The wedding was set for tomorrow. Among the onlookers, Ivy silently watched, eager to see what Bifitu's wife would look like. Then another young woman entered. She was Camelota, the youngest daughter of Hymen. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Old Hymen, nearly in his grave, actually had such a beautiful young daughter. Just when everyone assumed she would become Bifitu's wife, the pharaoh assigned her to the fourth prince. Ivy was a little surprised that she wasn't marrying Bifitu. But what surprised her most was that Hymen's eldest daughter was the pharaoh's wife. What a tangled web of relationships. But then Ivy thought, once Bifida became king, similar marriages would likely occur to consolidate his power. Ivy knew this was normal in ancient royal families. But a look of dejection still crept into her eyes. Bifitu's gentle, focused gaze would one day be directed at someone else. Just when everyone thought the banquet was over, the pharaoh summoned one last young woman. He said she would surely please Bifitu. After a period of quiet anticipation, a young woman was reluctantly led into the hall. She was a young woman draped in noble purple. Ivy couldn't help but sigh at her beauty. She was the 17th princess of the Heti kingdom, Princess Mathanidgeru. But the first words she spoke to the pharaoh were, "Kill me." She was the young woman draped in noble purple, the one the pharaoh intended for Bifitu. Her stunning beauty captivated everyone present. She was the most cherished 17th princess of the Heti king, Princess Mathanidgeru. However, due to her rebellious nature, she had fled the marriage arranged by her father. During her escape, she was caught up in a conflict and captured by Pharaoh Seti I. Mathanidgeru, now a captive in a hostile land, refused to submit. She pointed at the pharaoh and cursed him, determined to defy him to the death. Ivy felt a pang of worry for her. Did this princess understand her current predicament? Bifida thought to himself, this was good. His father would probably kill or exile the princess. That way, he wouldn't be forced to take her as a concubine. But the pharaoh wasn't angry. Instead, he burst into laughter. Not only did he not intend to harm the princess, but he insisted she become Bifitu's consort. However, he would never formally marry her. The princess, known as the most beautiful since the founding of Hedi and the most beloved by her father, would become nothing more than an unnamed consort to an Egyptian prince. The pharaoh's aim was to inflict this humiliation upon the Hedi kingdom. Then the pharaoh stood up and declared that his armies would crush the Hedi throne. Hedi would eventually become Egyptian territory. The ambassadors of the neutral nations, initially wavering, began to shift their support from the Hedi kingdom to Egypt. Princess Mathenidjaru collapsed to the ground, the humiliation worse than death. She had disgraced the Hedi kingdom and could never return. Pharaoh Seti, I urged Bifitu to take Princess Mathenidjaru away. The surrounding ministers cheerfully congratulated the prince. Only Bifitu remained frozen in place. No one understood his hesitation. Even Ivy realized this was an opportunity to crush the enemy's morale. If the princess bore Bifitu's children, it would further humiliate the Hedi kingdom. Ivy consoled herself, thinking that she had gained much from this trip to ancient Egypt. She imagined telling her brother Sien, who would surely be astonished. The key to returning home was in her hand, yet Ivy felt an inexplicable unease. Faced with the marriage arranged by the pharaoh, Bifitu finally agreed and extended his hand to Princess Mathenidjaru. Ivy understood this was the right course of action. For ancient monarchs, marriage was merely a tool to consolidate power. Though she couldn't explain why, she felt a strange pang in her heart. Once she put on the bracelet, everything here would cease to matter. However, after a long moment, the serpent bracelet on her wrist remained unchanged. A terrifying thought flashed through Ivy's mind. Would she ever be able to return home? Just then, Bifitu spotted Ivy hidden amongst the crowd. Ivy immediately turned and fled towards the hall's exit. Almost simultaneously, Bifitu, to the astonishment of everyone present, chased after her. Ivy didn't get far before he caught her. Bifitu looked at Ivy's disguise with some annoyance. He assumed she was trying to escape. When he learned she was merely observing the events, he tentatively asked if she had seen everything. Ivy simply replied that she had, and even complimented Princess Mathenidjaru's beauty. This wasn't the response Bifitu wanted. He hoped for a more complex emotional reaction, perhaps disapproval of his marrying the Hedi princess. But Ivy's reply remained rational. She believed Bifitu marrying Princess Mathenidjaru was a good thing. Bifitu suddenly gripped Ivy's chin and angrily demanded to know if she cared about him at all. Fear mingled with confusion in Ivy's eyes. She knew she couldn't respond to Bifitu's expectations. She said they were never meant to have any connection. Bifitu became furious. He couldn't understand why this peculiar girl constantly wanted to leave, as if she could go to a place he could never reach. Despair filled Bifitu's eyes. He swore to Ivy that he would immediately break off any relationship with Princess Mathenidjaru. He would marry Ivy right now and promised her anything she desired. Ivy felt a flicker of emotion at Bifitu's passionate declaration, but she knew she could never be his only wife. Throughout his long journey of power, there would be a second, a third, and even more Hedi princesses. Ivy suddenly felt a pang of sadness. Why should she care about these things? Shouldn't her primary concern be why she was lost in this time, why she had met him, and whether she would ever return to the present? Just then, the serpent bracelet began to emit a strange glow. Ivy stared intently at the familiar light. The next moment, the light enveloped her entire body. Bifitu frantically called out Ivy's assumed name, Nefertari. He instinctively knew the bracelet would take her away, but he could only watch helplessly as Ivy vanished in a flash of light. When Ivy opened her eyes again, she saw the familiar face of her brother, Sien. The serpent bracelet on her wrist pulsed with a strange light. Bifitu could only watch as Ivy disappeared before his eyes. Hazily, Ivy recalled childhood memories of her mother. In her memory, her mother, of mixed Eastern descent, was elegant and poised. Her mother always taught her to face everything with a smile. She thought her beautiful mother would always be with her. Until the winter Ivy turned 15 when her mother suddenly left her. Just when Ivy felt utterly alone, her brother Sien found her and revealed her true identity. She was the little princess of the Modiert family. Her brother brought her back to their home and promised never to leave Ivy alone again. Lost in these memories, Ivy slowly opened her eyes. She saw her father watching over her and her brother, Sien. Realizing she was back in the present, Ivy sat up excitedly. She looked at Sien with surprise. He was dressed impeccably and had a cheerful expression. It was the first time she had seen him like this. Her Her father's next words were even more unbelievable. Apparently, the months Ivy had spent in ancient Egypt had only been a week in the present. She had been found by Cien after collapsing in the garden last night. Ivy looked down at her wrist and saw the bracelet was still there. The time distortion must be related to it. She took the bracelet off and hid it under the covers. When her father asked about her experience, Ivy lied, saying she couldn't remember anything. After all, who would believe she had traveled to ancient Egypt 3,000 years ago? Seeing Ivy's dazed expression, her father assumed she had suffered greatly. He hugged her and comforted her. Cien, however, remained silent, sitting by her side until their father left the room. The atmosphere became strangely awkward. Ivy felt that Cien was upset. He didn't believe her story. He wanted her to tell him what had really happened. Unlike their easily fooled father, Cien had seen Ivy disappear in a strange light. He would believe anything she told him, no matter how absurd. But Ivy insisted she couldn't remember. She didn't plan to tell anyone. She wanted to forget the whole experience. Seeing Ivy's continued silence, Cien changed his approach. Who is Bifitu? This was a man who woke up every day to his own handsomeness. He could have lived off his looks, but he chose to rely on his talent. In just a few years, Cien had become a king of the British financial center through his brilliant business acumen. In his world, marriage was just a stepping stone to success. Women were dispensable to him, but there was one exception. Cien looked at Ivy intently and asked her who Bifida was. Ivy hadn't realized she had called out Bifida's name while unconscious. From her sister's flustered expression, Cien sensed there was more to the story. Bifitu, it sounded like an Arabic name. Had Ivy been with this man the whole time she was missing? The thought of what might have happened between them made Cien increasingly agitated. Ivy noticed her brother's changing expression. She asked him why he cared. Cien immediately explained that he didn't need a reason to care about his sister. He said that this stranger must have had an ulterior motive for approaching her. Listening to her brother's self-assured response, a look of dejection crossed Ivy's face. She knew she shouldn't expect anything from him. After all, he was getting married soon. Cien reiterated that his marriage and his concern for her were two separate things. But this only made Ivy more upset. If he was leaving her to get married, why did he still try to control her life? Wasn't she allowed to fall in love and be with someone? Cien listened, bewildered, unable to find a suitable response. By the time he tried to say something more, Ivy had buried her face in the covers, refusing to respond. Her rejection sent a pang of pain through Cien's heart. Defeated, Cien told her to rest and left the room. Leaning against the door outside, he fell into deep thought. He had once struggled alone in a harsh environment. The higher he climbed, the fewer people remained by his side. He was surrounded by darkness in the spotlight. And then, he had met his younger sister, his full sibling, for the first time. She was as beautiful as an angel, illuminating his life. Yet she was also so fragile, making him want to protect her. They had lived together harmoniously, understanding each other, as if they were born to. Bound by blood, they became the closest people in the world. This should have been a joyous thing. But it was also those words, bound by blood, that filled Cien with despair. Since Ivy's return, she had often been lost in thought. Thinking back on Bifitu, Ivy mused, a woman of such power and influence. She must have built a prosperous dynasty. Yet, Ivy had searched through history books and couldn't find her name anywhere. Could it be that Bifitu didn't become pharaoh? Or was she simply a mediocre pharaoh whose reign wasn't recorded? Ivy didn't want to dwell on those memories any longer. Back to her normal life, Ivy attended a university admissions interview today. She was presenting her research on the ancient Egyptian economy, articulating her well-versed viewpoints clearly and concisely. She answered the professor's questions with ease. They were surprised that such a young woman had such a deep understanding of economic history. They couldn't help but confirm Ivy's age again before launching into a lively discussion about her presentation. If she passed today's interview, Ivy would receive an acceptance letter from Cambridge University. Then she could finally escape the oppressive atmosphere of her family. In the months since her return, her father's relentless search for her supposed kidnappers had left the entire family on edge. Ivy still didn't have the courage to tell her father the truth. All she could hope for now was a fresh start at university. One of the professors posed an additional question, asking Ivy for her thoughts on the reign of Ramesses II. Ivy froze. Although the professor said it was just an open-ended question and she could answer freely, Ivy, not being well-versed in history, didn't dare to speak carelessly. She could only recite the commonly known historical facts. When she mentioned that Ramesses II had over 200 wives during his 90-plus years of life, a professor interrupted her, stating that while they held her research in high regard, they had concerns about the historical accuracy of her statement. Then, the professor revealed something shocking to Ivy. Ramesses II inherited the throne from Seti I and died less than 2 years later. He only had 3 wives: Princess Methernefer of Heti, his sister who was a priestess, and a foreign princess, Nefertari, who also died young. Furthermore, he didn't leave any heirs. Ignoring the stares of passers-by, Ivy ran straight to the library in the rain. She couldn't believe what the professor had said and had a terrible premonition. She began researching the history of Ramesses II. The historical accounts contradicted her unforgettable memories. The books described Ramesses II's short life. Had he not died so young, his achievements would have far surpassed those of his grandfather, Ramesses I. During his brief reign, he built many temples, and wherever his sculptures were found, there was also the image of his most beloved wife, Nefertari. The murals depicted Ramesses II's endless longing for her. Yet, the historical records offered little information about her, her presence as fleeting as a tiny shang. The terrifying truth dawned on Ivy. Bifetu was Ramesses II, and because of her reckless intrusion, she had drastically altered history. She couldn't bear to imagine what had happened to Bifetu after she left. Only today did Ivy discover the shocking truth. Bifetu was the renowned Ramesses II, and Bifetu, who should have lived to be 90, had died shortly after her departure. Even if she didn't want to admit it, the only possible explanation was that her absurd journey to ancient Egypt had changed history. Ivy walked head down in the rain, her eyes filled with self-blame and confusion. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice a dark sedan pull up beside her. It wasn't until a coat was draped over her head and her brother, Cien, asked her what she was doing there that she noticed him. Seeing his gentle gaze, Ivy's forced composure crumbled. She choked back sobs, confessing that she had made a terrible mistake and didn't know what to do. Cien held her tightly and comforted her, assuring her that no matter what she had done wrong, he would be there for her and wouldn't let anyone hurt her. Cien felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if he had promised Ivy long ago that he would always protect her. But Ivy remained distraught. It was all too unbelievable. She tried to confide in her brother, but, normally so articulate, she blurted out a string of illogical words. What if she had traveled thousands of years ago to a strange land and met strange people? Would her brother still be there to protect her? After speaking, Ivy realized she had irresponsibly dumped all her anxieties on her brother, Cien. He didn't blame her, but simply hugged her again. He whispered firmly in her ear that no matter where she went, he would always appear to protect her, just like now. In her brother's embrace, Ivy felt the strong bond of their blood ties. The next day, at the beauty salon, the tanned, short-haired young woman before the mirror was Ivy herself. She underwent a complete transformation under the ministrations of the staff. She also purchased a 3-month supply of portable spray tan. Leaving the salon, she began to check her supplies: flashlight, pepper spray, binoculars. She also brought her taser. Ivy made all these preparations to return to ancient Egypt 3,000 years in the past. She couldn't live peacefully knowing she had inadvertently shortened the rude prince's life by 70 years. This time, she would ensure Bifida met and married the real Nefertari. She would correct history as an observer. The modern girl, Ivy, had finally returned from ancient Egypt to her own time, only to discover that her blunder had altered the history of Pharaoh Ramesses II. Driven by a desire to right her wrong, Ivy disguised herself and prepared to return to ancient Egypt. This time, she was determined to fix history as a bystander. Upon arrival, just like last time, Ivy encountered a red-haired man. She immediately demanded to know if Ramesses II was dead. The red-haired man, taken aback, shoved Ivy away with a look of disgust. Who was this country bumpkin to speak such disrespectful words about the pharaoh, who had only been on the throne for 3 days? Learning that Bifetu was still alive, Ivy's worried heart settled. The red-haired man's name was Buka. He was the son of the village chief of a nearby village. Curious about the foreign-looking Ivy, he asked her why she was there. This time, Ivy didn't use a false name. She even revealed her home address in England. None of that mattered. What mattered was that she had to get to Thebes and find Bifatu as quickly as possible. But this was Giza, on the border of Egypt and Libya, a considerable distance from Thebes. However, Ivy was in luck. Bifatu happened to be at the nearby Memphis Palace, only a few days' journey away. Buka was also going to Memphis to see his brother. He decided to do a good deed and take Ivy along. Speaking of Giza, the current Lord of Giza was Bifatu's older brother. As the first prince of Egypt, he should have been the heir to the throne. However, said he, I ultimately bestowed the title of crown prince upon Bifatu, the second in line. The first prince was then appointed Lord of Giza. As they chatted on their journey, Ivy heard that familiar name again, Nefertari. Rumor had it she had died 5 years ago, but the current pharaoh still pined for her. Aside from political considerations, the pharaoh had only taken 2 wives. He neither favored them nor took any new ones. Just then, Buka's hawk suddenly became alert and flew off into the distance. Following the hawk, they found a man lying in a pool of blood. He had multiple stab wounds and an arrow in his back. They initially assumed it was the work of bandits. But things weren't so simple. With his last breath, the man told them that Libya had broken their treaty and attacked their village, Malai. Ivy had returned to ancient Egypt 3,000 years in the past to save Bifatu, but she had already run into serious trouble. Libya had broken the treaty and attacked a small village on the Egyptian border. Buka was furious. He wanted to go to Giza immediately and seek help from the first prince. But Ivy sensed something was amiss. She immediately stopped him. Giza was only a day's journey from the attacked village. The first prince couldn't possibly be unaware of the attack. Yet 3 days had passed with no response. There were only 2 possible explanations. Either Giza had also been captured, or the first prince was in league with the Libyans. Either way, they couldn't go to Giza. But Ivy reassured Buka not to panic. They still had options. Ivy told Buka to use his hawk to find his brother in Memphis. He specifically instructed that only troops should be requested for help. The pharaoh absolutely must not be personally involved. He's worried the Libyans aren't simply harassing the border. Ivy tossed the pen, paper, and box from her backpack to Buka. Buka, without time to examine the strange objects in his hands, was urged by Ivy to quickly write a letter. They then needed to hurry back to the village. Any crisis now could endanger Bifatu's life. Therefore, Ivy reminded herself that to save Bifatu, she absolutely couldn't let her guard down. Meanwhile, in the Memphis Palace, situated downstream along the Nile River, it was the most important city in Lower Egypt. Every pharaoh had to visit, even stay there. The newly crowned Bifatu was no exception. At this moment, Buka's eagle arrived and landed on the hand of a man. He was their old acquaintance, Mintis, Buka's brother. After reading the note Buka sent, his face drastically changed. Mintis immediately summoned a servant to bring his cloak. The scene shifted to the pharaoh's bedchamber. Although extremely anxious, Mintis could only wait outside, because inside, a vigorous session of lovemaking was taking place. A flushed young woman begged to serve her king again. Bifatu coldly told her to take her reward and leave. He warned her that any further presumption would be met with death. The young woman experienced firsthand, just as the rumors said, that the pharaoh possessed a strikingly handsome appearance that captivated the young women of all Egypt. Despite his reputation, they still yearned for his favor. However, none of the girls he favored were ever made concubines. Those who even entertained such hopes would mysteriously die. After the vigorous lovemaking, Bifatu discarded the girl and got up to leave. Just outside the door, he saw Mintis, who had been anxiously waiting. Hearing Mintis report an important military matter, Bifatu immediately guessed it concerned the Libyans harassing the border. He also guessed that Giza hadn't sent troops to help. Instead of showing any anxiety, he smiled. He knew his older brother would eventually turn against him. Mintis hadn't expected Bifatu to have foreseen everything. His well-built physique and handsome face captivated even Mintis, a man. Bifatu was puzzled. How did even Mintis know about this? had the enemy already approached. Mentis told Bifitu that wasn't the case. His younger brother had sent the news via Eagle, saying the Giza region had likely rebelled. They had partnered with the Libyans, and it wasn't a simple border harassment. Buka requested troops be sent quickly. However, the letter specifically emphasized that the pharaoh must not personally go to war. Bifitu took this strange piece of paper. It actually read, "Remember, Pharaoh, do not leave Memphis on a whim because of your fondness for the palace." Such audacity, a dangerous glint, yet also a hint of excitement, flashed in Bifitu's eyes. Thinking his king was angry, Mentis quickly pleaded for his brother and volunteered to handle the battle himself. Bifitu jokingly said that since his brother was so resourceful, delaying the enemy for a few days shouldn't be difficult. Menes was completely baffled. Bifitu's expression turned serious as he said he would personally lead a small force to the rescue. He instructed Mentis to remain in Memphis, as he suspected unrest, even an enemy invasion, would soon occur there. He would therefore leave the strongest troops with Mentis. Mentis finally understood that the village attack was a decoy, but doing this put Bifitu in considerable danger. Wasn't he afraid Mentis would rebel? As Bifitu turned to leave, he simply instructed Mentis to keep the incident secret. Mentis was surprised by the king's trust, realizing he had misjudged him. He immediately knelt on one knee, pledging to protect Memphis and await the pharaoh's triumphant return. Ivy's letter warned against the pharaoh going to war. Upon seeing the note, Bifitu, out of either curiosity or excitement, but insisted on personally leading the troops to the rescue. At this time, Ivy was traveling with Buka to the ravaged village. She drank water in large gulps while listening to Buka explain the local situation. Giza, located in the Mediterranean region, bordered several countries. Travelers and merchants brought a rich variety of goods to the people here. In contrast, the people living on the Libyan border struggled to get enough to eat. Therefore, Libya had always coveted the prosperous Giza region. Although both sides had signed a peace treaty, Egypt was currently in a period of dynastic transition, a time particularly prone to unrest. If they succeeded, the so-called treaty would be nothing more than a worthless piece of paper. If, at this time, the new pharaoh dispatched a large army to the rescue in order to consolidate his power, Memphis would become a vulnerable, empty city. Even Buka understood the perilous situation the pharaoh was in. But there was nothing two commoners like them could do. Ivy could only pray that Bifitu, upon seeing the note, would absolutely not bring his troops. Soon, they arrived at the attacked village. Buka immediately rushed forward and helped the dying village chief to sit up. Knowing his time was short, the village chief handed his token to Buka and entrusted him with leading the surviving villagers to safety. As if having completed his final task, the chief's hand fell limply to the ground. Although Ivy had anticipated the cruelty of war, witnessing the devastation firsthand, the horrific scene was still unbearable. She wondered if this was God's punishment for her meddling with history. Ivy clenched her fists. Now was not the time for grief. She urged Buka to pull himself together and lead the villagers away. At this moment, Buka seemed to understand what his brother had once said. His Majesty the Pharaoh could inspire happiness and unwavering loyalty with simple words. If Ivy were his master, he would surely dedicate himself to her completely. Her intelligent blue eyes seemed to offer endless hope. Meanwhile, in a Libyan army camp, the fat general was greedily gnawing on a chicken leg. He was already fantasizing about his triumphant return, when His Majesty would surely give him the imperial princess's hand in marriage. The position of Libya's top general was within his grasp, but then he received a report from his subordinates that the villagers were calmly and orderly retreating. The fat general was puzzled. Could the pharaoh's army have arrived so quickly? But his target wasn't these villagers. Just as he was about to retreat and continue waiting, another panicked report arrived. It turned out the pharaoh hadn't sent a single soldier to rescue the villagers. His entire army remained in Memphis. Realizing he had been tricked, the fat general was furious. He vowed to chop those villagers into mincemeat. Bifitu was finally about to encounter Ivy. Would he recognize her immediately? A short while ago, Ivy and Buka had gathered the surviving villagers. Unlike Ivy, who was preoccupied with drinking water, Buka seemed agitated. He was deeply worried. Could Ivy's plan really work? To leave so openly before confirming the pharaoh's rescue, and to keep it a secret from the villagers. Ivy wiped her mouth and calmly said, "If you want to deceive others, you must first deceive yourself." Retreating now is the least likely time for the Libyan army to suspect anything. Despite her confident words, Ivy was also worried. The plan hinged on reinforcements arriving. According to their estimated time of arrival, they should be here soon. If Bifitu hadn't sent troops, all their efforts would be in vain. Buka looked at Ivy's pensive expression. He felt a strong urge to protect this seemingly frail, feminine young man. If Ivy were a girl, he would willingly protect her for the rest of his life. In this moment of crisis, Buka couldn't help but confess his protective feelings for Ivy. Ivy smiled and thanked him, promising to remember him as a friend when she returned to the 3000s. Just then, the Libyan army attacked. This confirmed they had received news that Memphis hadn't sent reinforcements. Had Bifida truly abandoned them? Ivy tried to calm the panicked crowd, but faced with terror, no one was willing to stop. Even Buka pulled her hand, urging her to run. But how could human legs outrun war horses? Ivy couldn't help but wonder if she had made another mistake. Not only had she failed to correct history, but she had also cost even more lives. Just then, joyous cheers erupted beside her. "The pharaoh's army has come to save us. It's King Ramesses." Ivy abruptly turned to look. Amidst a group of poised soldiers, a figure sat triumphantly on a war horse. Was that really Bifitu? Ivy began to recall Bifitu as she remembered him, the youthful arrogance and the barely concealed restlessness he always carried. But who was this familiar yet strange person before her? Every gesture exuded a ruthless, regal aura. Could this be Bifitu's true nature? With a wave of Bifitu's hand, the pharaoh's army let out a resounding battle cry. Their formations were clear and precise, their ranks unwavering. The warriors fought bravely. In a mere instant, Libyan soldiers lay scattered across the ground. Ivy stared at the scene unfolding before her. Was this the true power of ancient Egypt at its peak? After 5 years, Bifitu finally met Ivy again. But Ivy was no longer the fair-skinned, beautiful, blonde-haired girl she once was. Now, she was just a dark-skinned, short-haired tomboy. Just before arriving, Ivy had darkened her face even more. Now, even her brother and father probably wouldn't recognize her. The only thing that remained the same were her large blue eyes. It was understandable that Bifitu wouldn't recognize her. And to Ivy, Bifitu seemed equally unfamiliar. The same eyes, the same nose and mouth. The prince who was once as passionate as the desert sun now exuded an icy demeanor. Bifitu smiled faintly and returned to his seat. It was only then, from their conversation, that Ivy learned Buka was Mentis's younger brother. Upon hearing that Ivy was the one who organized the retreat and wrote the letter to him, Bifitu asked her why she had written such a note. Ivy truthfully explained her reasoning. The Libyan attack was merely a diversion. Their true objective was to draw away the main forces from Memphis. Bifitu, intrigued, asked Ivy what they should do next. Ivy recalled the history she had altered. If not for Ramesses II's short lifespan, his achievements would have far surpassed those of his grandfather, Ramesses I, making him an emperor whose name would be etched in history for eternity. There was no time to hesitate. She had to gain Bifitu's complete trust. Ivy shared her insights on the current situation and her proposed course of action. Although her words were well articulated, it seemed they weren't the answer Bifitu sought. He then began to recount a story from his past. In his youth, he had kept a lion cub in the palace. Not only did he feed the lion live antelopes every day, but he also adorned it with the most expensive accessories made of gold and jewels. The amount spent on the lion over 3 years was enough to provide several villages with a lifetime of comfort. However, during a ceremony, the lion suddenly succumbed to its primal instincts and attacked its master. Without hesitation, he killed the lion. But this didn't deter him from keeping pets. Ivy understood the underlying message in Bifitu's story. He wanted her to pledge her loyalty to Egypt. As long as Ivy swore allegiance to him, she would receive generous rewards. Conversely, if she betrayed him, she would meet the same fate as the lion, eliminated without a second thought. Ivy bowed to Bifitu, pledging her loyalty. Of course, she wouldn't betray him. Ivy had returned precisely to protect him. Disguised as a dark-skinned, short-haired tomboy, she would ensure Bifitu wouldn't recognize her and then quietly correct history. This was precisely what Ivy desired. Yet why did her heart ache so much? The promises Bifitu had once made to her had vanished in the blink of an eye. Ivy returned to ancient Egypt and saw Bifitu once more. In a few months she had spent back in the modern world, 5 years had passed here. The once passionate prince had transformed into the cold and indifferent pharaoh. The promises made back then had scattered like the wind. Ivy felt an inexplicable sadness in her heart. Bifitu didn't choose to return to heavily guarded Memphis. Instead, he went directly from the already rebellious Giza border back to the capital, Thebes. A large army was already waiting to escort him along the way. It turned out everything was within his calculations. This man before her was bold in his military strategies, yet cautious in his actions, trusting in his people, yet always having a backup plan. Ivy couldn't imagine what had happened to change Bifitu so drastically, leading to his untimely death. In the blink of an eye, Ivy followed Bifitu back to Thebes. The breathtakingly magnificent city of 100 gates came into view. She could hardly believe this was the same place she had been not long ago. Was this the legendary prosperity of Ramses II's reign? At this moment, Ivy also saw a familiar face, Riddick. She was as stunningly beautiful as ever. In a daze, Ivy forgot her current identity and subconsciously followed Bifitu. Fortunately, Buka noticed and pulled her aside. Riddick reported to Bifitu about the situation in Giza. The rebellion was indeed planned by the crown prince, and Mentis had successfully quelled the unrest. The crowd below erupted in a cacophony of noise, condemning the crown prince's betrayal. Bifitu raised his hand to silence everyone. He ordered Mentis to immediately apprehend the crown prince and to kill him without mercy if he resisted. At the same time, he appointed a young judge to the position of Giza's governor. Ivy couldn't help but admire Bifitu's decisiveness. He showed no mercy in executing his own blood relative who betrayed him, while also readily appointing capable young individuals. Then Bifitu shifted the conversation, mentioning the upcoming flooding of the Nile. He asked Ivy for her opinion on how to manage the farmers. As the focus shifted to Ivy, Riddick, upon seeing her, couldn't help but call out the name Nefertari. Ivy immediately felt a sense of foreboding. Had Riddick recognized her? A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Only Bifitu seemed unfazed, urging Ivy to answer his previous question. Ivy turned to look at Bifitu, unsure of what he was thinking. He had clearly spoken about the same solution for managing the farmers before. Had Bifitu truly forgotten what she had told him? Or had he forgotten her entirely? The infrastructure-obsessed Bifitu decided to build a new city on the banks of the Nile. It would be called Pyrames, a city of legendary extravagance that would only appear in murals 3,000 years later, the new capital established by Ramses II after his ascension. Bifitu then praised Ivy, saying that despite her youth, she was a rare talent. He announced that, effective immediately, he was appointing her as a scribe. Only now did Ivy finally understand. Bifitu had deliberately asked her those questions so she could demonstrate her abilities in front of the ministers, paving the way for him to officially appoint her to a position. After the meeting adjourned, Buka told Ivy how dangerous her situation had been. He had lied to her when he said Nefertari was dead. 5 years ago, after Nefertari disappeared, His Majesty had frantically searched for her, even alarming Seti I. As a result, any girl who resembled Nefertari was killed. This decree wasn't abolished until the previous pharaoh's death. In Buka's eyes, Ivy was just a dark-skinned boy. Riddick must have been blind to mistake Ivy for Nefertari. Speak of the devil. Riddick suddenly appeared behind them. Feeling guilty, Buka quickly excused himself after a brief greeting. Riddick casually remarked, "The Mentis brothers are both so energetic." Ivy subconsciously nodded in agreement, then immediately realized her current persona didn't know Mentis. Ivy quickly tried to laugh it off. However, Riddick didn't press the matter. She had come to apologize for her earlier blunder in the hall. But Riddick still believed Ivy bore a striking resemblance to Nefertari, especially her blue eyes. In their Egyptian culture, they believed in reincarnation. No matter how a person's appearance changed, their true soul could be seen through their eyes. Before leaving, Riddick sighed and said something strange. "It's a good thing you're not her." Ivy didn't dwell on it. She was more puzzled by the fact that even Riddick almost recognized her. Had Bifido also sensed something? But recalling his previous indifference, it didn't seem like he recognized her. Ivy quickly dismissed these thoughts. She had returned solely to correct history. Wasn't it better if he didn't remember her? Just then, Buka came rushing back, holding a strange clay tablet inscribed with Hittite script. The most alarming thing was its message: rebellion plan failed. Initiate plan be immediately. Bifida used to spend every night alone by the lotus pond, lost in thought, until Ivy's sudden appearance and equally sudden disappearance. For 5 years, he searched every corner of Egypt. At the slightest hint, he would rush off, only to be disappointed every time. He vented his anger on everyone around him, neglecting Queen Mutnajmet, refusing the marriage arranged by his father, until his father flew into a rage demanding the golden-haired foreign girl. Bifitu experienced the pain of unrequited love for the first time. Ivy was like an ethereal reflection in the water, forever beyond his reach. A few short months that would take a lifetime to compensate for. From then on, he was never alone. Every night was filled with politics, construction, or nameless women. But starting today, for the first time, he dared to enjoy the solitude of the night again. Bifitus set down his wine cup and stood up. A triumphant smile played on his lips, because from today on, Bifitu could start thinking about her again. At that moment, Ivy sneezed. Such warm weather, why would she sneeze? Could someone be thinking about her? Ivy didn't dwell on it, turning her thoughts to the clay tablet. The rebellion mentioned must be the recent unrest in Giza. But that was supposed to be just a conspiracy between the crown prince and the Libyans. Why was this Hittite tablet connected to the rebellion? And how could it have so carelessly fallen into the hands of someone insignificant like Buka? This was a serious offense, punishable by death. Ivy examined the tablet closely. Besides the indecipherable script, there was a strange symbol. According to Buka, it was an intricately carved lotus. The owner must be someone of high rank. But the lotus was the Egyptians' favorite flower, while clay tablets were symbolic of Hittite writing. The combination was odd. A secret message meant to be concealed, yet boldly stamped with a personal seal. The thought made Ivy's head spin. The only certainty was that someone was colluding with the Hittites to harm Bifitu. A palace maid delivered a letter. The pharaoh invited them to a celebration in 3 days. Ivy and Buka exchanged knowing glances. This was their chance. All the officials would be present. They could search for clues. Before the banquet, Ivy was dragged off by palace maids for a bath and to change clothes. She stared dumbfounded at the strange oils, just as she was about to choose one at random. One of the maids naturally asked Ivy to remove her wig for cleaning. Apparently, wigs were commonplace in ancient Egypt. Ivy's mind reeled. The fact they so easily recognized her wig. Could everyone else already know? Ivy dismissed the maids who were about to bathe her. She removed her wig and sighed softly. This was the first time she had relaxed since her return. She recalled the hardships of her journey, enduring the heat while carefully concealing her true gender. Although she hadn't intended to disguise herself as male in the first place. It was all Buka's fault. He had mistaken her for a boy from the start, ordering her around. Now she felt awkward correcting him. As her skin slowly returned to its natural color, Ivy remembered the dark spray she'd brought. There wasn't much left. She'd assumed she'd be going back soon and hadn't brought much. Now, Ivy realized she'd overestimated her abilities. She'd also underestimated the power struggles within the royal family. If Bifitu had arrived any later, she might have been killed. She'd come to save him, but he'd ended up saving her. Just then, Buka's impatient voice sounded from behind her. He'd only meant to hurry her along. The banquet was about to start. He hadn't expected to see such a startling sight. After a brief moment of eye contact, Buka stammered apologies. He scrambled out of the room, practically tripping over himself. When he finally stopped, he thought back to the Ivy he'd just seen. Her beautiful blonde hair and her exquisite, just-bathed body. Buka finally realized Ivy was a woman. Blood immediately gushed from his nose. Ivy quickly dressed and adjusted her wig, praying that the oblivious Buka hadn't seen too much. But the blasted Buka was completely clueless about the situation. He kept stealing glances at Ivy along the way and suddenly declared he would take responsibility for her. Seeing that he was about to blurt out her secret, Ivy quickly covered his mouth, telling him to pretend he hadn't seen anything. They then arrived at the banquet hall. Ivy not only saw the breathtakingly beautiful Princess Lanita again, but also met Bifitu's other wife, the legendary maiden who could speak with the gods, Bifitu's younger sister, Amanra. Ivy discovered that someone in the palace wanted to harm Bifitu. She decided to search for clues at the banquet. Upon entering, she saw the beautiful Camelota again. The scene of Bifitu taking her as his wife immediately flashed through Ivy's mind. A complex mix of emotions welled up inside her. However, she'd heard Camelota had spent the last few years in the cold palace. She no longer had the same defiant spirit she'd once shown the pharaoh. Ivy also saw Bifitu's other wife, Amanra. Not only was she Bifitu's sister, but she also possessed the legendary ability to converse with the gods. Because of this, and under pressure from the ministers and priests, Bifitu had been forced to marry his own sister. The thought sent a pang of pain through Ivy's heart. She didn't understand this feeling, simply attributing it to jealousy over the incestuous relationship. Then Bifitu, the star of the banquet, entered the hall with confident strides. He raised his glass and drank it down in one gulp, officially starting the banquet. On this joyous occasion, Bifitu had prepared a gift for everyone to celebrate. It was an auspicious object blessed by the gods through Amanra. In this land that believed in the protection of the gods and the grace of the pharaoh, this divinely bestowed treasure naturally became the object of everyone's fervent desire. Suddenly, Ivy felt a malicious gaze fixed upon her. It felt as menacing as being coiled by a cobra. To dispel the feeling, Ivy immediately joined the scramble for the treasure. As the cloth was unveiled, a golden lion statue, gleaming brightly, appeared before everyone. Bifitu would bestow this treasure upon the most intelligent person of the evening. Then, Egypt's chief architect posed a riddle. How could one most conveniently and accurately measure the height of the Abu Simbel temple? The crowd below immediately erupted in a heated debate. Some suggested using stones, others proposed building a giant ruler, and so on. But all their answers were rejected. Then Ivy raised her hand to answer. The others scoffed, wondering what this foreigner could possibly know about Egyptian scholarship. Ignoring their taunts, Ivy said she only needed a small stick to measure the temple's height. First, stand the stick vertically on the ground at noon. Then, simultaneously measure the length of the stick's shadow and the length of the temple's shadow. Finally, using proportional calculations, one could deduce the temple's height based on the stick's height. Ivy had happened to read about these ancient Egyptian architectural principles while researching for a paper. The architect, stunned, immediately invited Ivy to join their architectural academy. Before Ivy could refuse, Bifitu declared her his scribe, forbidding anyone else from recruiting her. Then, Bifitu took the golden statue and walked towards Ivy, astonishing everyone present. A pharaoh personally bestowing a gift. This was an unprecedented scene. Bifitu approached Ivy, and she found herself gazing into his amber eyes at close range after a long while. Lost in thought, she barely registered Bifitu, placing the golden lion statue in her hands. Before Ivy could react, he returned to his throne. However, when Ivy picked up the golden lion statue, she discovered the lotus emblem engraved on its base. Could the person who wanted to harm Bifitu really be in this hall? Ivy felt her disguise might be compromised. Just now, Ivy had discovered another trace of the lotus emblem. This proved that the person plotting against Bifitu was likely present at the banquet. At that moment, the playful Amanra approached Ivy. After listening to Amanra's explanation of the golden lion statue, Ivy discovered that Amanra herself had applied the lotus emblem. However, this emblem wasn't exclusive to Amanra. Camelota also used it. To be precise, it was the royal emblem. Just then, Bifitu, curious about their conversation, walked over. Amanra immediately embraced him. Watching their interaction, a look of desolation crept into Ivy's eyes. Gradually, even the surrounding chatter faded. The next moment, Ivy felt a wave of dizziness. Her legs weakened, and she began to collapse. In that critical moment, Bifitu cried out the name Nefertari as he rushed forward and caught the falling Ivy. Everyone was stunned by this sudden turn of events. Nefertari, a name no one had dared to utter for 5 years, suddenly echoed from Bifitu's lips. Amira was also puzzled. Why would her brother call out that name? Looking at the slightly flustered Ivy, Bifitu shed his usual coldness, a faint smile gracing his lips. Then, in full view of everyone, he lifted Ivy into his arms. Amanda was completely dumbfounded. Her brother calling a young man Nefertari was strange enough, but to hold him like a princess. The courtiers below couldn't help but murmur amongst themselves. Blushing furiously, Ivy asked Bifitu to put her down. Ignoring her embarrassment, Bifitu addressed the crowd. For the past few years, everyone knew he had been searching for a foreign princess, and today he had finally found her. As he spoke, Bifitu pulled off Ivy's wig, revealing her beautiful blonde hair. Bifitu introduced the young woman in his arms as the legendary Nefertari. He then rewarded everyone present with 10 gold coins for witnessing this moment. The excited crowd erupted in cheers of "Long live the pharaoh." But amidst the joyous clamor, Ivy felt that icy gaze again. That person was indeed among the officials. Bifitu then carried Ivy swiftly out of the banquet hall. What was it like to think about the same person every day for 5 years? During those 5 years, Bifitu had learned how to command armies and govern a nation, but he couldn't understand why Ivy had left. He wondered if he had been too rough, if he shouldn't have sent her away, or if he shouldn't have given her that bracelet. So he learned to be gentle and considerate, took no new wives, and shattered all the serpent-shaped gold bracelets in the kingdom. He only wished for Ivy not to leave him again. As he spoke, Bifitu lowered his noble head. Ivy hadn't expected Bifitu to change so much in the few months she was gone. He could now decide the fate of a nation with a smile and a few words. The future pharaoh was still so young. He needn't bow to anyone but the sun. Ivy couldn't help but ask when Bifitu had recognized her. Bifitu had recognized her the moment he saw her on that hill. He gently stroked Ivy's face and said, "Did you think a wig and darkened skin could fool me? That's because you haven't spent every day for the past 5 years thinking about the same person." Completely exposed, Ivy blushed even deeper. She asked Bifitu if keeping her by his side as a scribe was all a test. Bifitu flicked Ivy on the forehead. He saw that she was deliberately trying to hide her identity, so he decided to play along. Now that her identity had been revealed, Ivy no longer needed to be a scribe, as it was a position only men could hold. Ivy spoke up, immediately making a request to Bifitu. She wished to attend their meetings as an observer, simply standing by his side like an attendant. Ivy promised she would never do anything to harm Egypt, and hoped Bifitu would trust her. Bifitu toyed with Ivy's cheek with his finger, resting his chin on his hand. It seemed Ivy had forgotten the promise he, as only the pharaoh's son, had made 5 years ago. Bifitu looked at Ivy affectionately and said, "I am now the pharaoh of Egypt. I can give you anything you want. If it's reasonable, you ask for one, I'll give you 2. If what you want is unreasonable, then I can be an unreasonable monarch. Whatever you desire, I can fulfill it." Bifitu embraced Ivy tightly, pleading with her to stay. Ivy was truly touched by Bifitu's heartfelt confession. At this moment, she would stay to save Bifitu's fate, but one day, she would still have to go against his wishes. How would she face him then? Ever since Ivy's identity as Nefertari was revealed, Buka had been desperately avoiding her. The oblivious Ivy didn't notice Buka's shyness, only thinking that Buka was blaming her for not being a good friend. She hoped Buka wouldn't be upset. The most important thing now was to find the person who intended to harm Bifitu. Just then, Ivy covered Buka's mouth as he tried to retort, because she spotted a suspicious figure wearing a cloak. And that person was none other than their old acquaintance, Riddick. Ivy hurriedly pulled Buka aside to hide, accidentally falling on top of him. Ivy, ignoring the flustered Buka, was preoccupied with the question of why Riddick was sneaking around the cold palace. She muttered that the only person living there was Camelota. A bad thought suddenly flashed through Ivy's mind. How could she have forgotten that Camelota was Princess Hetty, the holder of the lotus emblem? Coupled with the Hetty-inscribed clay tablet, her suspicion was undeniable. But why was Riddick involved now? At that moment, Bifitu suddenly appeared and Riddick was right behind him. Ivy froze, unable to comprehend the situation. Beside her, Buka's mind was in chaos. He had been so close to the pharaoh's beloved. He thought he was doomed. Ivy hadn't yet realized the gravity of the situation. She simply didn't know how to face Bifitu, so she made up an excuse and tried to slip away. But this only displeased Bifitu further. He grabbed Ivy's hand, preventing her from leaving. He then turned and ordered Buka to be sent back to Giza, never to leave. The sudden turn of events startled Ivy. She knew Buka's greatest wish was to follow the pharaoh in his campaigns, to become an outstanding soldier like his brother, Mintu. This was equivalent to ruining Buka's future. Ivy recalled how she had inadvertently changed the fates of others time and time again. Ivy felt incredibly saddened. She wished she had never come here. And this struck a chord with Bifitu's own pain. He wouldn't allow Ivy to say such things. Ivy was his most important, his first consort. Not executing Buka was already his greatest concession. He didn't understand why Ivy would say such things. Bifitu forcefully pulled Ivy toward a pillar and then kissed her without warning. Ivy immediately pushed Bifitu away. Blushing, she said that where she came from, only lovers who shared mutual feelings could do such things. Bifitu slammed his hands against the pillar. He desperately wanted to know how much longer it would take for Ivy to truly see him. Bifitu longed for Ivy to genuinely look at him, but Ivy's eyes seemed to only see Bifitu's life story. This made him feel a pang of loneliness. He picked Ivy up and carried her toward a high platform. Atop the platform was a magnificent view of the new Khonsu temple. Bifitu began to describe the sculptures to Ivy. The one in the middle is Egypt's greatest sun god, and standing on either side are their sculptures. Bifitu's purpose in doing this is to prove before the sun god that 5 years ago, he already considered Ivy his true consort. In addition to this, he is also planning the new temple of Abu Simbel. He wants the gods in heaven and the subjects of future generations to witness all of this. Bifitu held Ivy close, urging her to remember his words. I will be the greatest pharaoh of Egypt, and you only need to watch by my side. No matter where you are or who you become, you are mine. More than moved, Ivy felt anxious. The Abu Simbel Temple is a magnificent structure from the time of Ramses II. Every year, on his birthday and coronation day, divine light appears. 3,000 years later, his and Ivy/Nefertari's sculptures will stand here, lifelike. However, Ivy believes she is only an imposter Nefertari. Therefore, she frantically tries to stop Bifitu from placing her sculpture there. Bifitu cannot understand Ivy's thoughts. He holds on to the last sliver of hope. He implores Ivy, under the witness of the sun god, to remain silent and agree to be his consort. Ivy knows she cannot accept Bifitu's sincerity. She firmly believes her existence will only ruin Bifitu's future. At this moment, Bifitu feels like he is truly going mad. He seems to have grown tired of Ivy treating him like Uni from the bottom of the Nile, carelessly trampling on his feelings. Since that day, although Bifitu still brings Ivy to some meetings, they no longer communicate. Bifitu has not set foot in Ivy's residence or inquired about her. The palace maid Pute, who serves Ivy, doesn't understand this. She has heard their story from her sister since childhood. Everyone could see how happy the pharaoh was to see Ivy again. Pute says her sister is also called Nefertari. Originally, the previous king wanted to betroth her sister and several other noble ladies to the pharaoh. Before Pute could finish, Ivy interrupts her. She repeatedly confirms Pute's sister's name. Nefertari. She is Ramses II's most beloved consort. Ivy seems to have finally found direction on the path of correcting history. Now, she just needs to find out who wants to harm Bifitu, confirm the relationship between Riddick and Camelota, and finally return her position to its rightful owner. Today, Ivy disguised herself as a palace maid because she's going to meet Bifitu's true destined consort. According to Pute, after her sister Nefertari broke off the engagement, she chose to become a priestess in the temple of the new guest apartment. Not only is she beautiful, but she is also well loved by everyone. Ivy knows that noble daughters receive all kinds of education from a young age, all for the sake of one day becoming a queen. Now, Because of her appearance, their efforts have been wasted, leading her to have to pursue a religious vocation. Ivy once again feels incredibly guilty for changing someone else's life. Lost in thought, she accidentally bumps into a passerby. The water jug in her hand flies into the air. Fortunately, the passerby has quick reflexes. He steadies Ivy, who almost falls, and catches the water jug. When Ivy sees the man clearly, she is startled. Because the other person is none other than her brother, Hyman. Ivy can't help but hug him. Overcome with emotion, she pours out all her longing for her brother and family. Ivy didn't expect her brother to truly fulfill his promise. Her brother once said that as long as Ivy needed him, no matter when or where, he would appear and give her a hug. But the man doesn't seem to be the real Hyman. He says that although they don't know each other, he doesn't mind continuing to hug in the marketplace. Realizing the other person isn't her brother, Ivy hurriedly pushes him away. The atmosphere is slightly awkward. After all, Ivy was the one who initiated the hug, so she can't blame anyone else. Just then, Pute's calls come from the distance. As Ivy is thinking about meeting up with her, the man cups Ivy's chin and gently kisses her forehead. He also says he hopes to see Ivy's true face the next time they meet. After saying this, he turns and leaves. Ivy stands frozen in place. Everything happened so suddenly. She didn't expect to meet someone so similar to her brother Hyman in this distant era. She doesn't know whether this is a blessing or a cruel irony. Later, they arrive at Pute's home. Ivy finally met the real Nefertari. She was helping some children with their bullying. At that moment, she also noticed Ivy and Pute. She immediately recognized Ivy's blue glasses. Ivy didn't intend to hide anything either. She openly admitted that she was from 3,000 years in the future and had accidentally borrowed Nefertari's name, messing up history. Ivy hoped the other woman would understand that she was Ramses II's true, beloved consort. Nefertari didn't understand most of what Ivy said, but she understood one key thing. The pharaoh truly loved Ivy the person, not the name Nefertari. It didn't matter what her name was. She told Ivy there was no need to feel guilty. Becoming the pharaoh's consort wasn't the life she wanted. She was very happy to dedicate her life as a priestess. Here in Egypt, they believed in the gods. She believed all this was by divine arrangement. The pharaoh had a burning love for Ivy, and Ivy wanted a bright future for the pharaoh. These two things weren't in conflict. Ivy just needed to face her own heart and be true to her own feelings. Just how humble can one be when in love? Look at the Egyptian pharaoh and you'll know. Bifatu gazed at the custom-made gold and jeweled necklace in his hand. He imagined how beautiful Ivy would look wearing it. But the next moment, he recalled the scene of Ivy cruelly rejecting him. In a fit of anger, he flung the necklace away. It happened to land in the hands of Riddick, who had just pushed open the door. She looked at the necklace in her hand, realizing she might have come at a bad time. But Riddick couldn't help it. She had important military intelligence to report. According to the report from Mentis, the Libyans hadn't supported the eldest prince of Giza and had retreated before the city gates were breached. At the same time, Mentis also sent another sealed letter to Bifatu. Bifatu told Riddick not to worry and to open it directly next time if the same situation occurred. Although he said so, Bifida didn't really mean it. The three of them had worked together for 10 years and never hid anything from each other. This time, Mentis deliberately used a sealed letter. Was there something he didn't want Riddick to know? After seeing the contents of the sealed letter, Bifatu showed a moment of surprise. Then, as he burned the letter, he told Riddick that Mentis had discovered secret documents proving the eldest prince's collusion and treason with the Libyans and had asked whether to make it public. Even though Riddick was suspicious, she couldn't confirm the truth of the contents. After reporting her work, she excused herself. Bifita watched Riddick leave. He recalled the contents of the letter. In reality, Mentis had discovered that Hedy was the mastermind behind this rebellion. He worried that there were Hedy spies in the palace. However, Bifatu wasn't anxious. Instead, he found it more interesting. The biggest regret of his grandfather and father during their lifetimes was their inability to expand Egypt's territory beyond the banks of the Nile. They hadn't even been able to stop the Hedy people's endless attacks on their borders. This was his chance. Bifatu would use his sword to extend the blessings of the sun god to the shores of the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, Ivy didn't sneak back to the palace until late at night. On the way, she asked Pute about some other things. When she asked if she had ever seen Riddick entering or leaving the harem, Pute was quite surprised by Ivy's question. As the high priestess, Riddick couldn't possibly appear in the harem. Even so, Ivy was certain she hadn't been mistaken that day. The person she saw in the cold palace was Riddick. There must be some hidden reason. Could it be that Riddick was an Egyptian? Pute immediately dismissed Ivy's guess. In Egypt, non-natives couldn't hold priestly positions. However, Pute had heard a rumor that Riddick was actually of mixed Egyptian and Heti blood. It was said she was the child of the previous king's younger brother, who had forced a Heti female captive to bear his child. Her mother committed suicide after giving birth to Riddick. Ivy hadn't expected such a tragic rumor about Riddick. If the rumor was true, Riddick's existence was undoubtedly a time bomb for Bifitu. As Ivy pondered these things, a large hand reached out towards her in the darkness. Ivy grew increasingly suspicious that Riddick was the one plotting against Bifitu. Just as she was trying to guess the other person's next move, a figure in the darkness pulled her over forcefully. Ivy came to her senses and realized it was Bifitu. He gently removed her wig and asked where she had been. Ivy retorted petulantly that it was none of his business. As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. She didn't understand why she was being contrary with Bifitu. At her words, Bifitu dejectedly released his hands. Seeing this, Ivy immediately turned to explain, but ended up bumping into Bifitu's face. She hurriedly took a half step back and explained that what she said earlier was just out of pique and that she hoped Bifitu would believe she had his best interests at heart. Ivy decided to tell Bifitu about the suspected Heti presence in the palace and that the person trying to harm him was likely someone very close to him. Bifitu didn't show much of a reaction. He simply said that without solid evidence, taking rash action would only alert the culprit. Ivy could tell from Bifitu's attitude that he seemed to already have an idea, but she still hoped she could help. Bifitu told Ivy not to worry about it, and that protecting herself was the biggest help she could give him. With that, he turned and left Ivy's room. That day, Riddick reported to Bifitu as usual. He said that Heti had sent an envoy seeking an audience. As relations between Egypt and Heti were currently delicate, he suggested Bifitu handle the matter personally. Bifitu didn't pick up on Riddick's topic, instead mentioning Mintus's meritorious service in the recent campaign and how he was considering rewarding him. Riddick suggested promoting Mintus to commander of the 5 armies. However, Bifitu had a better idea. He wanted to reward Mintus with a wife. Riddick initially agreed, but when he heard the intended bride was Ma'at Horneith Jarrett, he immediately looked surprised. Riddick thought this might be inappropriate, but he couldn't come up with a good counterargument. As Bifitu pointed out, everyone knew the pharaoh only had eyes for Nefertari. Ma'at Horneith Jarrett had been neglected and never received any favor. Riddick stammered, asking if Bifitu had considered Nefertari's feelings. Bifitu thought Riddick seemed to have forgotten something important. His father had betrothed Ma'at Horneith Jarrett to him to humiliate Heti. Giving her to one of his generals would be an even greater insult to Heti. Besides, Mintus should be happy to take Heti's most beautiful princess as a concubine. The matter was settled. Bifitu was satisfied with this decision and urged Riddick to prepare for the Heti envoy's audience. That day, Ivy disguised herself as a guard and snuck into the palace. Bifitu was about to meet with the Heti envoy. Ivy worried that the Heti's arrival was ill-intentioned. Regardless of their purpose, she was determined to stop anyone trying to harm Bifitu. Just then, Bifitu entered the hall with Ma'at Horneith Jarrett. Riddick, who usually stayed by Bifitu's side, was seated far away. He realized Bifitu had become suspicious of him. Riddick also understood that given his background, suspicion was inevitable at such a critical time. Then, the Heti envoy was summoned into the hall. A bearded man, carrying an ornate box, walked at the front with an air of confidence. This confidence stemmed from Heti's strength, which surpassed that of Egypt. However, this man, named Mamucha, seemed more like a warrior than a diplomat. The man following him was named Tari. This was the same man Ivy had encountered on the street, the one who seemed to be lost in thought. For a moment, Ivy thought he recognized her. Then, Tari requested to shake hands with the princess. Shaking hands with Heti's most beautiful princess would be the greatest honor for them. However, for some reason, Ma'at Horneith Jarrett seemed terrified. Ivy couldn't help but wonder how an ordinary envoy could frighten the Heti princess so much. After receiving Bifitu's permission, Ma'at Horneith Jarrett still looked bewildered. She turned to Riddick, seemingly seeking help. Watching their subtle interaction, Ivy was completely stunned. Had he been wrong all along? If these two were really trying to frame Bifitu, then the 2 envoys present should be their accomplices. But why was Ma'at Horneith Jarrett so afraid? as if these two envoys were here to harm him. He extended a trembling hand. Tari took Ma'at Horneath Jarrett's hand, speaking of how the heady king missed him. At the same time, he secretly slipped something into his hand. After exchanging a glance, Ma'at Horneath Jarrett quickly withdrew his hand and the object. Bifatu simply watched their interaction silently. Then Mamucha said they had come on the heady king's orders to visit Princess Ma'at Horneath Jarrett. They also brought a precious gift for the pharaoh as a token of friendship between the two nations. It was a temple blueprint drawn by their finest craftsmen. They knew Bifatu enjoyed construction. Mamucha also expressed his wish to personally explain the blueprint to Bifatu. After the guards searched him and confirmed he had no weapons, Bifatu allowed him to approach with the blueprint. But Ivy felt the scene was eerily similar to the story of the assassination of Jingku. Could the weapon really be hidden inside the blueprint? Have you ever seen the Egyptian version of the assassination of Jingku? The man before her was explaining the blueprint in his hands to Bifatu. Ivy, hidden amongst the guards behind them, worried that this man would take the opportunity to assassinate Bifatu. She pulled out the pistol she brought from the modern era, and her worst fear came true. The moment the dagger was revealed, everyone was stunned. Tari shouted, trying to stop his companion from doing something foolish. But the enraged Mamucha lunged at Bifatu without hesitation. Seti, I had killed his entire family years ago, filling him with hatred for Egypt and the pharaoh. Although Ivy was prepared, the two were grappling, preventing her from aiming at Bifatu. Bifatu, also aware of Ivy's presence, was more concerned for her safety than the immediate danger. Just as Bifatu was distracted, speaking to Ivy, Mamucha's dagger was nearly upon him. At the critical moment, Riddick appeared before Bifatu, taking the fatal blow for him. Bifatu reacted quickly, drawing his sword and severing Mamucha's hand. He ordered the guards to drag Mamucha away and execute him. But because the dagger was poisoned, Riddick, lying on the ground, was bleeding black blood. Ma'at Horneath Jarrett rushed to Riddick's side, desperately calling his name. Riddick tremblingly raised his weakening hand. The man before him was the beginning of his life. He had decided long ago that even if he was misunderstood or hated by the world, he would willingly die to protect this man. But he still had one regret, that he couldn't take his princess away. Once there was a little boy named Bifatu. Orphaned, he lived with an old woman. From a young age, he studied theology under his grandmother's guidance. He believed that once he became a great priest, his father would be proud of him and return to see him. At the age of 14, he became the youngest priest in Egyptian history. But because of his appearance, he was still bullied and ostracized by others. His grandmother couldn't bear to lie to Bifatu any longer. He was actually the child of the king's younger brother and a servant girl. His mother, unable to bear the shame after giving birth to him, took her own life. Upon learning the truth, Bifatu fled his home in a frenzy. He prayed to the gods, hoping it wasn't true. Just then, a voice called out, instead of asking those possibly non-existent beings, why not seek the truth yourself? A masked youth appeared behind him. The youth removed his head covering and said, if you're willing to come with me, I can help you find the answers you seek. From that day forward, Bifatu became a presence in Riddick's heart that transcended faith. This was the scene of the two youths' first encounter. Bifatu's eyes were filled with a kingly aura, once caused by the waver, wanting to follow her. But he still held onto the last shred of hope for his father. He longed for his father to return and tell him the truth himself. However, when he returned home, his grandmother, who had raised him since childhood, lay dead in a pool of blood. His grandmother was assassinated by his father's men for revealing Bai's true parentage. Bai himself was also targeted for elimination. This moment not only completely shattered the last glimmer of hope in his life, but also his faith in the gods. Even though Bifatu arrived and saved him, Bai felt nothing. He believed that without hope or faith, he could no longer be of any help to Bifatu. Just as Bai was about to turn and leave, Bifatu firmly grasped his hand and said, then have faith in me. Remember my name? Ramesses. This name will become the name of Egypt's greatest pharaoh, and you will become my most trusted vizier, the first minister. Maps are carved on every magnificent temple, revered by all. From now on, you are no longer Bai. Your name is Riddick, Perhaps following these eyes could truly lead him to a more real, more expansive world. Thus, he became Riddick by Bifitu's side. Later, he witnessed Bifitu being officially designated as the Crown Prince. At the same time, Riddick, with his unprecedented wisdom, became the youngest First Minister. During a mission, he met a beautiful girl on the border between Egypt and Hutti. They developed feelings for each other. Although unaware of each other's identities and names, they promised to meet again a year later. But later, a foreign girl calling herself Nefertari burst into the scene. This quirky, tormented girl made the young prince lose control. She seemed capable of changing Ramesses' life at any moment. Riddick had thought that perhaps it would be better if this girl disappeared. Unexpectedly, one day she did. Many things happened in the following 5 years. Ramesses ascended to the throne as pharaoh, as he had wished. Riddick remained by his side, constantly moving forward, witnessing a broader and more vibrant world. This was Riddick's faith, but all of this seemed to be coming to an end. The dying Riddick collapsed into Bifitu's arms. He still apologized to Bifitu for leaving his post without permission. Bifitu didn't understand why Riddick was still smiling at him. Even though he knew he was suspected, he offered no clarification. Shouldn't he resent his master? Bifitu urged him not to speak such foolish words. He still needed Riddick's continued assistance for many things. Riddick was grateful for having followed Bifitu all these years, seeing many things beyond reality. He hoped Bifitu would fulfill his dream. In his final moments, he turned to look at Maat Horneith Jarrett. His beloved was right before his eyes, but he could no longer protect her. Unable to even utter a farewell, Riddick weakly closed his eyes. No matter how Maat Horneith Jarrett called his name, he never woke up. The wise young man who had sworn allegiance to Bifitu 10 years ago now lay cold in his arms. For the past 10 years, they had grown accustomed to discussing their dreams late into the night, or galloping along the Nile, surveying the beautiful landscape of Egypt together. In truth, Bifitu had long considered Riddick his most trusted friend. His dream was also Riddick's dream. At this moment, Bifitu was filled with remorse. He had actually suspected this person who had sacrificed himself to protect him. Bifitu suddenly snapped back to his senses. He realized it was all the fault of those damned Hittites. He immediately ordered the remaining Hittite envoy to be arrested. But just then, they discovered that Tari had already taken Ivy hostage in a corner. Ivy secretly turned the gun, aiming it at Tari's back. Tari, however, seemed to have already known that Ivy was holding a dangerous weapon. The knife in his hand pressed firmly against Ivy's neck, and he ordered Ivy to drop the gun immediately. Left with no choice, Ivy had to comply. Bifitu was now radiating an aura of intense rage. Not only had his best friend died before his eyes, but now the person he loved most was being held hostage. Ivy felt incredibly guilty. It was because of her willfulness and carelessness that Bifitu was now in such a precarious situation. Tari's condition was clear: a horse and safe passage out of the city. He lightly grazed Ivy's neck with his blade, a provocation aimed at Bifitu. Look, he taunted. Even Nefertari's shoes are red. Seeing this, Bifitu grew tense. Ivy thought, Tari's ruthlessness is just like her brother's. Yet, paradoxically, this very ruthlessness made her unlike her brother. Because even with all his schemes, her brother would never use Ivy as a pawn, just as Bifitu resigned himself to Tari's demands. Ivy stealthily removed the pendant from her neck and quickly sprayed something in Tari's face. It was pepper spray, an instant incapacitant. The moment Tari collapsed, the guards swarmed forward, intent on killing her. Ivy immediately shielded Tari. She still needed to learn the true traitor's identity from her. Now that Riddick had been cleared, the real culprit must still be close to Bifitu. Bifitu also realized that the traitor was the reason he'd suspected Riddick, ultimately leading to his death. With this in mind, Bifitu was determined to find the person truly responsible for Riddick's death. He agreed with Ivy's plea to spare Tari for now, but his emotions remained turbulent. Whoever the traitor was, the Hittites were undeniably involved. He resolved to make them pay, even if it meant war. His beloved princess had become the pharaoh's concubine, suffering humiliation in the cold palace. Yet Riddick had always prioritized loyalty. Ivy finally understood why Riddick had occasionally shown her hostility. The thought of Bifitu's grief-stricken figure made it hard for her to breathe. Ivy began to consider her next move. Perhaps she should visit the unfortunate princess princess. As she rose to leave, she suddenly remembered another crucial task related to the incident. Moments later, Ivy hurried to the royal dungeons where dangerous criminals were held. The place was steeped in secrets and legends. There, Ivy found the person she sought. Tari, battered and bruised, lay weakly imprisoned in her cell. She hadn't expected Ivy's visit. The legendary Nefertari. Only now did Tari truly see Ivy's real appearance. Ivy wasn't there for small talk. She had several questions she needed answered. Based on Tari's actions in the palace, Ivy suspected she was no ordinary envoy. Her status was clearly higher than Mamuch's, even surpassing the princess's. Even if she said nothing, Bifida had probably already figured it out. Tai smirked. Although she knew Ivy was trying to trick her, she readily revealed her true name, Yari. But she was surprised that Ivy seemed completely unaware of her name. Could someone so brave in the palace be so ignorant? Yari became even more intrigued by Ivy. Ivy proposed a trade. She produced a stainless steel badge from the modern era. It was harder than ordinary metal and might improve Yari's chances of escape. In exchange, Yari had to reveal the true traitor in the palace. Yari found this increasingly amusing. She then uttered a name Ivy hadn't expected. Ammoniusara, Bifitu's sister and concubine. Everyone could see her affection for Bifitu. Ivy couldn't understand why Ammoniusara would conspire with the Hittites against him. Yari was equally confused. They had never planned to assassinate the pharaoh. Egypt wasn't an empire that could be toppled by simply killing its ruler. Their king had always wanted to see the princess and bring her back to Hutti. However, despite her humiliation, the princess insisted on staying in Egypt. Their mission was to retrieve her. Ivy still didn't understand why Ammoniusara would cooperate with the Hittites. Yari simply said she had approached them willingly. Having learned the truth about the traitor, Ivy honored the deal and tossed the stainless steel badge to Yari. She also declined Yari's invitation to return to Hutti with her. Ivy helped Yari this time only because she strongly resembled her brother. But this was a one-time thing. Since Yari was against Bifitu and Egypt, they would be enemies the next time they met. Watching Ivy's departing figure, Yari seemed a little disappointed. Bifitu, the supreme pharaoh of Egypt, had fasted for 5 days over the departure of a minister. Since Riddick's death, Bifitu had shut himself in his room. No one knew whether he was alive or dead. Upon hearing this, Ivy immediately rushed to the pharaoh's chambers. Outside the room, everyone was waiting around helplessly. Seeing this, Ivy angrily rebuked them. The pharaoh hadn't eaten or drunk anything for 5 days, and they were indifferent. Something might have happened to him inside. Ivy then went to the door and frantically pounded on it, shouting for Bifitu to open up if he was still alive. Everyone wore expressions of disbelief. They wouldn't dare dream of speaking to the pharaoh like that. Ivy abruptly turned around. She angrily demanded to know why they were still standing there and ordered them to find someone to break down the door. Just then, the sound of the door opening came from behind her. Ivy turned to see Bifitu, the one whose life or death had been uncertain. Aside from a slightly sorrowful expression, he seemed to be in relatively good health. The first thing Bifitu said after opening the door was that he had decided not to go to war with the Hittites for the time being. He had shut himself in his room for 5 days to contemplate this decision, using this radical self-torment to maintain his sanity. Torn between avenging his loyal minister and ensuring the peaceful lives of his people, Bifitu ultimately chose the latter. Mentis immediately expressed his agreement with this decision. The pharaoh had inherited the throne less than a year ago. If he wanted to destroy the vast Hittite empire, the current priority was to steadily increase national power and strengthen the army's fighting capacity. The famous Battle of Kadesh was supposed to happen 5 years after Ramses II ascended the throne. Ivy was very uneasy about this. Her biggest worry was whether Bifitu would even live to see that day. She inquired with concern about his physical condition. Bifitu smiled faintly and took Ivy's hand, leading her into the room. Although he insisted that a pharaoh wouldn't starve to death, Ivy believed that even if a pharaoh possessed extraordinary mental and physical strength, they were still human and needed to eat. Bifitu was happy to see Ivy visit him. He stopped Ivy as she tried to explain. He knew Ivy had a reason for being there. but he still considered it a personal visit. Ivy sat beside Bifitu and looked at him intently. Thinking about it, he was only 25 years old. At such a young age, he had to suppress his emotions to rationally consider the fate and decisions of the nation. The thought of Bifitu having to bear this burden alone in the future made Ivy involuntarily reach out, wanting to comfort and help him. Just then, a guard rushed in with a report. The Hittite in the dungeon had escaped. For the sake of the nation's fate, Bifitu had to suppress his emotions. His lonely figure made Ivy want to comfort and help him. But at that moment, a guard brought urgent news. The Hittite in the dungeon had escaped. Ivy hadn't expected Yari to actually escape with just that small badge. She figured the guard at the dungeon would soon reveal everything. Knowing Pute's personality, she would definitely take all the blame. The guard continued to furiously denounce the person who helped Yari escape, saying it must be the real traitor in the palace. Ivy's heart skipped a beat. This way, wouldn't she become the traitor? Bifida noticed Ivy's subtle reactions. He ordered everyone else to leave, as he wanted to conduct the interrogation personally. Ivy considered telling Bifitu that the real traitor was Ammonius R.A., but there wasn't enough evidence. Her words alone wouldn't be enough to convince anyone. Before leaving, Bifida looked back at Ivy. He gave Ivy permission to do whatever she wanted as long as she stayed there. But was this really okay? Since Ivy had returned to ancient Egypt, the course of history had deviated time and time again. It was as if she were a stone thrown into the torrent of history, disturbing the calm flow of the water. Gradually, even she herself was becoming lost within it. Riddick was assassinated with a poison blade. Mintus was shot dead by a volley of arrows. Even Bifitu fell before her eyes, protecting Ivy. Ivy woke with a start. It had all been a dream, but this was no time for relief. She rushed out of the room, finally realizing how foolish she had been. She was already caught in the currents of history, yet she kept thinking she could remain a bystander, single-handedly changing the tide, and then casually leaving with her bracelet. But that was no longer possible. Bifitu had left an indelible mark on her heart. She had refused to admit it, afraid that her feelings would lead to disastrous consequences. But because of this, she decided to confess to Bifitu. Whatever the outcome, she was willing to bear it. No more running away. But it seemed everything was already too late. A large number of soldiers were gathered in the square. Bifitu was preparing for a war mobilization. All-out war between Egypt and the Hittites was about to break out. Since Riddick's death, everything seemed to have started moving uncontrollably. There had been a chance to salvage the situation, but Yari's escape had triggered it all again. Throughout history, the conflict between Egypt and the Hittites had never ceased. It wasn't until the reign of Ramesses II that this long conflict finally ended. But this war was supposed to happen 4 years later. Now, it had been brought forward by more than 4 years. Ivy was incredibly frustrated. In this catastrophe, what could she do to ensure Bifitu's survival? Under Bifitu's mobilization, all-out war between Egypt and the Hittites was imminent. Ivy couldn't understand how things had escalated beyond repair in just one day. And she learned for Shepset what had happened. Bifitu had drugged her food with sleeping pills. She had been asleep for 3 days. Although Ivy had expected that Bifitu, with his suspicious nature, wouldn't be fooled about her letting Yari escape, she didn't understand why he hadn't confronted her. He had just let her sleep for 3 days. This left the already weakened Ivy in a state of confusion. However, what happened next was even more incomprehensible. A beautiful woman appeared beside Bifitu. It was Nefertari, Shepset's sister. Set, grant strength to our brave warriors. Lead great Egypt to glorious victory. He was praying to the gods for this expedition. While Ivy was asleep, Nefertari had replaced Riddick and become the current vizier of Egypt. Ivy stared at the two figures on the platform. They would create an immortal love story, praised even thousands of years later. Although 6 years late, they had finally met. Blessed by the gods, the soldiers seemed filled with strength. They chanted in unison, "Long live Egypt." Then Mintus made a request to Bifitu. He said he had someone to recommend who could help Egypt achieve a great victory. This person was his younger brother, Buka. Last time, because he had been too close to Ivy, Bifitu had sent him back to Giza, never to leave. This time, hearing that the pharaoh was personally leading an expedition against the Hittites, Buka was willing to do anything to serve his country. Mintus was certain of his brother's determination to help Egypt achieve a great victory. After a moment of thought, Bifitu appointed Buka as the deputy commander of the Set Legion. This was the bravest and most elite unit among the pharaoh's 4 legions. Bifidus ordered Buka to lead the first echelon and charge into battle, demonstrating his resolve and courage. Mentis was shocked. Even Ivy understood that sending Buka, who had no battle experience, on this expedition was a death sentence. She understood Bifidus' intention to lure the enemy deep into their territory. But why choose Buka? He was Mentis' younger brother. Wasn't this putting himself in a heartless and unjust position? Ivy didn't understand why everything was spiraling out of control. She had only wanted Ramesses to live a good life, for his true concubine to create a love story for the ages. Now, everything was heading in the direction she least wanted to see. Ivy knew she couldn't remain lost any longer. She had to put history back on the right track. For Bifidus' survival and for the restoration of history, Ivy decided to take immediate action. She found Mentis and tried to persuade him to take her along on the expedition. Mentis wouldn't dare take the pharaoh's favorite concubine to the battlefield. He refused Ivy's request, using the excuse that women couldn't go to war. In truth, there was another reason for his refusal. Mentis didn't trust Ivy. Recently, rumors had spread through the palace that Ivy was the traitor. They said she had conspired with the Hittites to deceive the pharaoh, causing Riddick's death and the escape of the Hittite prisoners. Ivy quickly clarified that she wasn't the traitor. During the days they were formulating the battle plan, she had been unconscious. The real traitor was one of the people currently aware of the entire plan. Ivy mentioned that before their departure, the oracles would divine the auspiciousness of the expedition based on the departure time and route. Mentis didn't understand what Ivy meant. After all, Riddick was gone. Ivy didn't beat around the bush. She directly named Ammonius Ra. As a maiden who could communicate with the gods, she would pray to the gods before every pharaoh's expedition. Therefore, she would have a corresponding understanding of the marching plan. Ivy told Mentis about the Hittite clay tablet with the lotus inscription and the information she had learned from Yari. She knew it would be difficult for Mentis to believe her, but this also concerned Buka's life. She offered her own life as a guarantee, only asking that Mentis take her along on the expedition. Guards arrived with an urgent report. The pharaoh had been attacked. Hearing this dreadful news, Ivy's legs went weak. She barely avoided collapsing thanks to Mentis' support. Fortunately, they heard that Bifidus' life wasn't in danger and that the assassin had been captured. It was Matahoni Jeru. Upon hearing this, the two immediately rushed to the scene. When Ivy saw that Bifidus was still alive, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. On the other side, Matahoni Jeru was kneeling on the ground. Ivy hadn't expected him to actually be the assassin. At that moment, an elder stepped forward and reprimanded Ivy. A mere servant dared to appear in the main hall. Having no other choice, Ivy removed her wig. She said she had only come to check on His Majesty. Bifidus gave her a tender look. Ivy subconsciously looked away. Hadn't Bifidus already lost trust in her? She scoffed internally. Since he had even resorted to using sleeping drugs, why bother letting her harbor futile fantasies about him? Then Ivy noticed the dropped bronze dagger. She immediately realized that bronze itself was cytotoxic. If the wound was too deep and not treated properly, it could still be life-threatening, just as Ivy was about to suggest that she treat the wound. Nefertari also arrived at the main hall. The two who had once desperately wanted to be together were now separated by life and death. That beautiful princess had long lost her former spirit. From this day forward, she would relinquish the rights of life, and as Bibi, serve the god of death and reincarnation for the rest of her days. In Egyptian belief, reincarnation meant Bifidus must have hoped they could meet again someday. This was also a kind of liberation for the princess. From the moment they met, they had deeply imprinted each other on their hearts. Now, they could finally, justifiably, be together forever. Ivy once again blamed herself for changing the fate of others. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but recall letting Yari go. Could this also lead to irreversible consequences? Her muttering to herself caught Mentis' attention. He nervously asked Ivy to confirm the name of the Hittite envoy. When Mentis heard the name Yari, he was completely dumbfounded. Ivy must not have realized what a formidable figure she had released. A few years ago, the Hittite king was still an incompetent and foolish monarch. But in recent years, the Hittites' overall national strength had been rapidly increasing. It wasn't their king who had brought about all this, but the true ruler behind the king. At that moment, in the Hittite palace, the king was pacing back and forth anxiously, because that person was about to return. With the announcement from outside the door, a figure appeared at the entrance to the main hall. This person was none other than Yari, who had just escaped from Egypt. Faced with Yari's obeisance, the king didn't dare show any disrespect. He invited Yari to sit down and dismissed the others. Yari initially declined the king's celebratory banquet, as she had to leave for Syria immediately afterward. She also estimated that the Egyptian army would reach the Sinai Peninsula within a few days. The king panicked upon hearing that Egypt was planning to attack the Hittites. Yari reassured the king, saying that he only needed to give the order to deploy troops, and she would handle the rest. She requested 5,000 troops from the king, anticipating that the pharaoh would mobilize 5 legions for this expedition. This was the perfect opportunity to crush the Egyptian army. She was determined to make sure that one of the Egyptian legions wouldn't return. Before leaving, Yari remembered something else. She pointedly mentioned Mamusha, calling him an unexpected individual. This king had personally chosen the people to accompany her, nearly getting her killed in Egypt. The king immediately apologized, saying it was just an accident. Finally, Yari informed the king that she had personally delivered the poison to the princess. Facing Yari's arrogant demeanor, the king could only suppress his anger. Yari Agranal, a person whose methods and strategies rivaled those of Ramesses. Ivy had helped her once because she bore a striking resemblance to her brother. She hadn't realized that she was the true mastermind behind the Hittite Empire. Now, Buka was about to march to Minya, a mere stone's throw from the Sinai Peninsula where the Hittite army was stationed. Sending Buka against such a formidable opponent was tantamount to sending him to his death. Meanwhile, at the border region of Minya, Buka was leading the vanguard, repelling a small enemy force. He thought that if he kept winning like this, he would not only gain the pharaoh's recognition, but also Ivy's admiration. Buka quickly shook his head, dismissing these thoughts. Now is not the time for daydreaming. He ordered 100 men to stay behind and support the Set Legion following behind, while the rest continued to advance with him. Along the way, Buka rescued many displaced Egyptian refugees. Strangely, they hadn't encountered a single Hittite soldier, even after they had almost distributed all their food. Then, a guard informed him that they were approaching Syrian territory. Buka realized he had pursued the enemy too far. Retreating and waiting for his brother's reinforcements was the right course of action. However, if he did that, he would forever remain just Mentis's younger brother. Buka didn't want to be merely someone's brother. He wanted to achieve merits and earn the pharaoh's recognition through his own efforts. Only then would he be worthy of standing before Ivy. So, Buka waved his hand and led his troops into Syria. At that moment, the Hittite army's banner rose in the distance. They suddenly emerged from all directions, surrounding Buka's troops. Their numbers far exceeded their expectations. To make matters worse, a black chariot appeared among the enemy ranks. This signified that the opposing force was led by the Hittites' top general, Yari Agranal. Buka froze, unable to think of any strategies or formations. Yari slowly approached him. She had come to the front lines with a faint hope of encountering that mischievous young girl. Since she wasn't there was no need to hold back. Yari raised her hand. Just as Buka thought his time was up, a familiar voice called out from the distance, "Buka, you idiot." Both Yari and Buka were stunned by the sight before them. A golden figure on horseback, holding a banner high, appeared. Behind her, a sea of crimson banners fluttered in the wind. Buka stared in disbelief as Ivy led the Set Legion to his rescue. Just when he was in dire straits, Ivy arrived with the pharaoh's most elite troops. Besides astonishment, Buka couldn't help but feel puzzled. The Set Legion should have been hauling chariots. Even with high mobility, they shouldn't have been able to catch up to his vanguard so quickly. Ivy urged Buka not to just stand there and to leave quickly. She would explain on the way back. Watching Ivy charge in a battle on horseback, Yari became even more intrigued by this extraordinary girl. She was completely different from the frail figure she had met the first time. Yari ordered her troops not to pursue them. She didn't want a direct confrontation with the Egyptian Set Legion so soon. However, one man disagreed. A bearded man believed it was merely a deceptive tactic by the enemy and requested to lead a pursuit. Yari didn't have the slightest impression of this man. She simply found his face irritating. She gave a short laugh and assigned him 1,000 soldiers. She specifically warned the bearded man not to pursue too deeply. Right now, in Yari's mind, neither controlling the Hittites nor defeating Egypt was as interesting as keeping Ivy by her side. The trouble was, Ivy happened to be the Egyptian pharaoh's concubine. Causing an international incident at this time wouldn't be appropriate. Just as Yari was engrossed in these thoughts, a subordinate interrupted her, worried that the bearded man's troops would be annihilated by the Egyptians. Yari was unconcerned. This encounter was merely a test of each other's strength. As long as the bearded man obeyed her orders, he would be safe. Otherwise, he would simply become a gift to Ivy and Egypt. Meanwhile, Buka stopped Ivy. He didn't understand why they were retreating instead of counterattacking now that the Set Legion had arrived. Ivy then revealed that the real Set Legion hadn't arrived yet. She had simply taken the fastest troops and brought their banners as a ruse. Seeing the bruises all over Ivy's body, Buka realized she couldn't even ride a horse properly, yet she had risked so much to save him. Buka silently vowed to repay Ivy one day. Later, when the bearded man discovered the planted banners, he thought, as expected, the Egyptians were trying to fool them. In the position of first general, it shouldn't have been given to that Yari. Someone not of Hittite blood would never be truly loyal to the Hittites. The bearded man ignored Yari's warning and ordered his men to continue the pursuit. When he saw the crimson banners ahead again, he assumed the Egyptians were trying the same trick. But when he got closer and saw the figures that resembled the Grim Reaper, it was already too late. After a series of screams, Mentis reported to Befitu that they had annihilated all the pursuing Hittite soldiers. Befitu was unconcerned. He simply asked where Ivy was. In ancient Egypt, when every warrior turned 18, they would choose a master and swear allegiance to them, following them blindly, regardless of right or wrong. Buka had always intended to pledge his loyalty to the pharaoh, but Ivy's sudden appearance had caused him to waver. He had requested this expedition to gain glory and resolve his inner conflict. He hoped Ivy wouldn't confuse him any further. However, at that moment, Buka was surprised to find Befitu had quietly appeared behind them. Ivy was also puzzled. Why was Befitu here? Shouldn't he be in Thebes with the real Nefertari? Did such a small border skirmish require the pharaoh's personal command? When Ivy left Thebes, she had made up her mind. Since history couldn't be changed, all she could do now was rescue Buka, uncover the truth behind Amuniasare's actions, and then leave and return to the future. Ivy glanced back at Befitu and was surprised to see him looking very angry. She instinctively started to run. She didn't understand why Befitu was so angry with her. Befitu immediately mounted his horse and chased after Ivy. Ever since Ivy had returned to ancient Egypt, she had wondered if Befitu suffered from some kind of facial paralysis. She had never seen any joy, anger, sorrow, or happiness on his face. Only this time, Ivy clearly saw an angry expression on Befitu's face. In the end, Ivy's 2 legs couldn't outrun the horse's 4. Befitu grabbed her and pulled her onto the horse. Ivy didn't understand why Befitu was so angry. She hadn't done anything wrong this time. Befitu angrily told her to shut up. He sternly asked what her relationship with Yari was. Ivy immediately explained that she had met Yari less than 3 times. She hadn't known Yari was such a formidable person at first. She had only let her go to exchange information about the traitor. Befitu couldn't help but ask Ivy why she cared so much about the Egyptian traitor. It was none of her business. The same question annoyed Ivy. She retorted that she didn't care what happened to Egypt. She just didn't want to see Befitu in danger. Ivy warned Befitu to be careful, even of those around him. She also said she would return her own time eventually. Hearing Ivy say she wanted to leave, Befitu suddenly grabbed her arm. Ivy felt Befitu's intense anger again, but she insisted she would leave sooner or later. She also said it was Befitu who distrusted her first, even drugging her. She didn't care about staying here. They weren't from the same world. Ivy became more and more agitated, even saying that everything here was just a false image. After speaking, Ivy realized she had misspoken. Befitu, hearing this, smirked slightly. He gently lifted Ivy up and then set her down. Befitu had suspected something like this, but he didn't expect Ivy to use such words. At this moment, Ivy had the urge to tell Befitu the truth. But would anyone believe such an absurd story? Hesitantly, Ivy revealed that she was from the future. Ivy finally told Befitu that she came from the future. Befitu wasn't surprised. He had a premonition when he saw Ivy again on that small hill in Giza. 5 years had passed for him, but Ivy hadn't aged a day. She looked exactly as she did when they first met. Ivy desperately explained her situation, hoping Bifidu would believe that everything she did was to help him. However, Bifidu didn't care about any of that. All he could think about was that Ivy could easily go to places he could never reach with the Golden Chariot. Perhaps their next meeting would be decades later. Or perhaps Ivy had no intention of returning at all. Bifidu couldn't let that happen. He grabbed Ivy's hand and asked how many years in the future she was from. Ivy thought Bifidu was asking to learn about Egypt's future, so she honestly answered that she was from 3,000 years in the future. However, Bifidu then suddenly blurted out, "Nefertari is the traitor." He explained to the bewildered Ivy that if it hadn't been for Ivy insisting on treating his wounds in place of Nefertari that day, Nefertari would have been beheaded on the spot for treason. Bifidu told Ivy that he had never doubted her. Rumors had begun circulating in the palace that Nefertari was a spy, so Bifidu had found someone to impersonate Nefertari in the rumors. He saw that Ivy didn't seem to remember what he had said, so Bifidu confessed his love to Ivy again. "I am the Pharaoh of Egypt. I can give you anything you want. If it's reasonable, you ask for one, I'll give you two. If what you want is unreasonable, then I can be an unreasonable monarch. Even if you want my life, I can give it to you, as long as you promise to stay by my side." To hide her embarrassment, Ivy immediately changed the subject. She asked Bifidu what he had originally planned to do with Nefertari. Bifidu kissed Ivy's neck as he answered. "Nefertari conspired with her sister to release the Hittite prisoners. She approached me, the pharaoh, under the guise of a priestess and poisoned me. She committed treason, a capital offense." Bifidu added that before he left, he had already arranged for Nefertari and her sister to be executed in a few days. To ensure Ivy could stay safely, Bifidu would clear all obstacles. If Ivy still wanted to leave, then he would kill Buka and the others as well. Ivy finally understood the reasons behind all the strange occurrences. Nefertari being appointed as a priestess, ordering Shepset to drug her, sending Buka to the battlefield, and entrusting him with an important mission. It turned out that these were all part of Bifidu's plan. He wasn't joking. If Ivy insisted on leaving this time, Bifidu really would kill everyone. Ivy couldn't help but ask if he was threatening her. Bifidu lowered his noble head and gently leaned against Ivy. He spoke the harshest words in the gentlest way. "Yes, I'm threatening you. What else can I do to stop you from leaving me?" This was the second time the Pharaoh of Egypt lowered his noble head before the girl. Bifidu, invincible in the eyes of the world, had to be cautious for the sake of this one person. He was forced to feign a threat out of helplessness. At this moment, Ivy's heart was deeply touched. It turned out that in this world, the person she was most reluctant to leave wasn't Shepset or Buka, but the man before her. Here, Ivy, despite the chasm of 1,000 years, felt an unprecedented happiness. It was only then that she realized how reluctant she was to leave Bifidu. She realized she had fallen deeply in love with him. Ivy, with newfound resolve, asked if Bifidu would always stay by her side if she remained. To hide her shyness, she turned her head away as she spoke, adding that she had no family here. Bifidu could hardly believe his ears. He hadn't expected Ivy to actually agree. Overjoyed like a child, he lifted Ivy high into the air. Then he kissed Ivy deeply. Bifidu told her they would immediately go to Memphis, the nearest city, and hold the ceremony there at once. He promised Ivy that, from then on, they would attend all manner of occasions together. Their images would appear together on murals, and their statues would stand side by side in the temples. He would make Ivy the greatest queen of Egypt, so that even the world 3,000 years later would witness their love. At this moment, Ivy was truly moved. Bifidu's promises were so beautiful, they frightened her. She was just an intruder who had stumbled through time, disrupting the destinies of others. But Bifidu had his empire, his great cause, and his magnificent life to fulfill. Although Ivy would never see her father and brother again, here she experienced a happiness that transcended anything she had known before, a happiness she couldn't bear to abandon. Bifidu gently set Ivy down. He took her usual bag from a guard. Then, he took out the serpent-shaped gold bracelet. It was Ivy's key to traveling through time. This Bifidu could no longer allow her to keep. With a wave of his hand, Bifidu ordered everyone to depart from Memphis immediately. Now, Ivy truly had no choice but to stay in ancient Egypt. But a faint unease lingered in her heart. Could she truly stay here and be with Bifidu forever? Would you believe it? The Egyptian pharaoh wasn't just a romantic. He was also a straight man. Ever since Ivy agreed to stay in ancient Egypt, Bifidu had quickly brought her to Memphis to prepare for their wedding ceremony. Upon entering the city, Ivy was captivated by the bustling marketplace. She felt the urge to explore. Seeing this, Bifidu immediately embraced her tightly. He said that Ivy was soon to be the queen of Egypt and couldn't wander around such places freely. He wouldn't even allow her to remove the headscarf she wore. Bifidu was already completely acting as Ivy's fiancée. Now that Ivy thought about it, she had only agreed to stay in ancient Egypt, not to marry Bifidu. It was more like Bifidu hadn't even given her a romantic proposal or asked for her opinion. The more Ivy thought about it, the more annoyed she became. She complained internally that Bifidu was a total chauvinist. Soon, they arrived at the palace in Memphis. Its luxurious decorations rivaled those of the capital, Thebes. The handmaidens led Ivy to a room. The moment the door opened, Ivy was stunned by the sight before her. The room was filled with a dazzling array of clothes and jewelry, each piece seemingly priceless. Ivy thought back. Since returning to ancient Egypt, she hadn't properly dressed herself, always wearing androgynous clothing. However, the main reason was that Egyptian women's clothing was impractical for moving around. So, Ivy refused the luxurious garments offered by the handmaidens. She pointed to one of them and requested a similar outfit. After bathing and changing, Ivy felt refreshed, but she soon became bored. She wished Shepset were there, so they could sneak out of the palace and have some fun. The handmaidens hadn't expected the pharaoh's favored consort to be such a peculiar young woman. To entertain her, they summoned a group of skilled singers and dancers. This was Ivy's first experience with ancient Egyptian performances, and she found them quite interesting. Meanwhile, in the council chamber, Bifidu was discussing the arrangements for marrying his queen with his ministers. Impatient, Bifidu wanted to set the date for 3 days later. However, based on their astrological observations, the ministers determined the auspicious date to be 15 days later. Furthermore, the ceremony for marrying a queen was very complex, and they needed at least 10 days to complete the preparations. But Bifidu ignored all of this. To avoid further complications, he made it clear that the wedding ceremony would be held in 7 days regardless, the day Ivy would swear before the gods to become his wife. Bifidu had waited long enough. He didn't want to wait a moment longer. As long as the Nile flows and the sun shines, my devotion to her will never fade. The day Ivy swore to be Bifidu's wife forever was a day he had long awaited. To avoid the numerous obstructions from the old ministers in the capital, Bifidu decided to hold the wedding ceremony in Memphis 7 days later. However, Bifidu had another important matter to attend to. The ambush on Buka's troops was clearly premeditated. This proved there was a traitor among the Egyptian elite who had leaked their military plans to the enemy. Therefore, Bifidu decided that from that day forward, all military plans would be discussed only between himself and Menahotep. The soldiers would only be informed the day before departure, and the priests would be forbidden from knowing the marching route. After finishing his work, Bifidu went to the courtyard where Ivy was staying. Ivy had already fallen fast asleep after the captivating performance. Seeing this, Bifidu picked her up and held her gently in his arms. Although the pharaoh's affection for Nefertari was common knowledge, everyone was still surprised to see such tenderness in his eyes. In her drowsiness, Ivy continued to praise the performers. Bifidu, in high spirits, told everyone to collect their rewards. At this moment, everyone was filled with hope for Egypt's future. Having this kind, gentle, and beloved young woman as Egypt's queen would surely be a wonderful thing. Later, when Ivy woke up in a daze, she suddenly realized that Bifidu's chiseled face was right in front of her, and she was sleeping in his arms. Ivy blushed crimson. She hurriedly asked Bifidu why he was there. Bifidu acted nonchalant, saying that it was his palace, and he could sleep wherever he pleased. He also told Ivy there was nothing to be shy about, as they would be sleeping together sooner or later anyway. While Ivy was still thinking of a retort, Bifidu told Ivy to get dressed quickly because he was taking her out to the market. Hearing that they were going shopping together, Ivy's eyes lit up. She excitedly uttered phrases like first date that Bifidu couldn't understand. She almost tripped over a vase on her way to change. Watching this worrying yet heartwarming scene, Befittu silently vowed that he would stay with Ivy forever, no matter what. What's it like to have a date with the Pharaoh of Egypt? Looking at the bustling marketplace, Ivy was about to start shopping freely when Befittu grabbed her from behind. Then he wrapped her from head to toe in scarves, turning her into a proper, albeit mummified, princess. No matter how much Ivy complained, Befittu refused to let her show even an inch of skin. Two beautiful women not far away noticed them. Or rather, they were captivated by Befittu's undeniably handsome profile. With a single glance, they understood each other. Then, they approached from both sides, bumping into Befittu simultaneously and separating him from Ivy. Their infatuated expressions immediately enraged Ivy. Without a word, she pulled Befittu away, clinging to him like an octopus, and glared at the two women who had just approached them. She looked as if to say, "He's mine. You can't even look at him." Ivy declared matter-of-factly that this was how couples walked when they were on a date where she came from. Befittu wasn't concerned with how they walked. His focus was on whether Ivy had been on dates like this with others before. Ivy wondered how the conversation had gotten to this point. She quickly changed the subject, explaining that her name, Nefertari, was actually borrowed. Then, she told Befittu her real name, Ivy. Upon learning this, Befittu said her name, Ivy, for the first time. This gave Ivy a strange feeling. Then, Ivy started drawing on the ground. He explained to Befittu that Ivy's name meant rose, his favorite flower. Ancient Egyptians used hieroglyphs, and he hoped Befittu would remember that this flower represented Ivy's name. Befittu smiled gently and agreed. Ivy instinctively turned her head away. Lately, whenever Befittu looked at her, she would blush and her heart would race. Just then, a guard approached Befittu. Ivy realized that someone had been following them on their date. However, her attention was immediately drawn to the painting the guard carried. Princess Yaminara had arrived in Memphis. She was the true traitor who colluded with the Hittites, the one Ari had mentioned. Now that she had presented herself, Ivy could find an opportunity to expose her true colors. She was the maiden who could speak with the gods. Guided by the sacred jade, she could always accurately predict the future. Because of this ability, Yaminara had successfully married her beloved older brother, the pharaoh. This time, she came to Memphis ostensibly to congratulate her brother on his upcoming marriage. However, the sacred jade told her that Ivy could not become the queen of Egypt. The god said the blonde maiden did not belong to Egypt. Her arrival would only bring war and misfortune to the kingdom. Yaminara's words touched upon Ivy's own anxieties. In truth, her presence had been changing the destinies of others. Yaminara added that if her brother insisted on marrying Ivy, she could have Ivy undergo the trial of the gods. The gods would decide if she was fit to be queen of Egypt. These words stunned Befittu. He warned Yaminara not to speak such nonsense again and to stay in Memphis for the next few days. Yaminara believed she was merely conveying the divine message. Any lie would cause her to lose her ability to speak with the gods. She bowed and left the hall. Ivy curiously asked Befittu what the trial of the gods was. However, Befittu didn't want to know about such things. He simply said it had nothing to do with her. Later, Ivy learned from Buka that the trial of the gods involved locking someone in a sealed chamber for a day and a night, leaving their life or death to the gods. Ivy thought this trial was clearly unreasonable. There was too much room for human interference. She worried that if she were locked in the chamber, she could easily be assassinated in the middle of the night. Ivy also wanted to know why Yaminara was called the maiden who spoke with the gods. For years ago, when Yaminara was only 11, she suddenly and accurately predicted that Hittite troops were causing trouble at the border. Although no one took it seriously at first, as the incidents increased, such as the timing of Hittite troop deployments in which officials were assassinated by the Hittites, Yaminara's predictions proved true every time. The previous pharaoh was overjoyed. He immediately discussed it with the priests, and Yaminara was given the title of the maiden who spoke with the gods. Ivy immediately realized that almost all of the prophecies were related to the Hittites. Thinking about it in reverse, it was easy to see the clues. It was just that no one had ever considered it from that perspective. Although the motive was unclear, Yaminara was undoubtedly the traitor by the pharaoh's side. Seeing Ivy lost in thought, Buka asked if she really wanted to be queen so badly. It could attract the jealousy of others, and the pharaoh's love might not be eternal. Ivy understood these things. She didn't care about being queen. She simply wanted to be with Bifidu. Yamunara's identity as the traitor of Egypt was finally about to be exposed. That night, Yamunara secretly snuck into the pharaoh's study. Just as she was about to steal the orders for the Hittite campaign, Ivy and the others caught her red-handed, even though she was caught in the act. Yamunara still didn't believe she had done anything wrong. She believed her actions were merely following the instructions of the gods. Ivy saw no deception in Yamunara's clear eyes. She believed so completely in the god in her heart. Ivy almost couldn't bear to tell Yamunara the truth. The so-called maiden who spoke with the gods was actually a scheme the Hittites had been implementing for 4 years. The Hittites deliberately fed Yamunara small-scale plans, which she then relayed through the princess. The Egyptian people would then believe she possessed some mystical power. To Yamunara, this was utter nonsense. She had never revealed any Egyptian information to any Hittites. She insisted that she had only been communicating with the gods. Ivy knew Yamunara wasn't lying. The problem lay with the so-called god. Ivy asked Yamunara to describe the god's appearance. Egyptians and Hittites looked very different. It was easy to tell them apart. Yamunara thought for a moment. She had only met the god once. Afterwards, communication had been through sacred stones. She only remembered the god having eyes like the sea, blue as the ocean. The god had promised Yamunara that she could become someone special, someone worthy of standing beside her brother, the pharaoh. So, young Yamunara believed that person must be a god. Yeriner, a voice suddenly rang out. Bafida had arrived. He continued the conversation, describing 2 distinct features of the Hittite king, Yeriner. Dark hair and ice-blue eyes. Yamunara couldn't believe it. She desperately wished someone would tell her it wasn't Yeriner. But everything pointed to the truth. The god she had always believed in was her brother's greatest enemy. Yamunara glared at Ivy's blue eyes. She remembered the day her fate had changed. Young Yamunara was playing when she encountered a mysterious person. The person provocatively asked Yamunara if she could keep a secret. Yamunara was angered. She swore on the spot that if she couldn't keep a secret, she would never marry her brother. This naive oath made the person laugh. Yamunara was even angrier at the person's rudeness. She turned her back, refusing to engage further. But then, the person said something that shocked her. I can make you someone special. You can marry your brother. In ancient Egypt, marrying Ramesses II was every girl's dream, including his sister, Yamunara. When she was 11, a self-proclaimed god promised to fulfill this wish. From then on, Yamunara had a sacred duty to relay the god's will to the Egyptian people and report all of Egypt's movements back to the god. Eventually, Yamunara not only became the girl who could speak with the god, but also married her beloved brother in a sacred marriage. Therefore, she believed in the god's words without a doubt and was filled with reverence, until she learned that Ivy was going to marry Bifidu and become the queen of Egypt. For the first time, Yamunara fabricated a divine message and lied, saying the blonde girl could not be Egypt's queen. Her arrival would bring misfortune to Egypt. Although she was filled with unease at first, as the wedding was postponed, Yamunara saw the false prophecy working even more effectively than she had imagined. She increasingly realized the importance of her title as the girl who spoke with the god. So, when the god approached her again, asking her to reveal Egypt's next marching route, Yamunara knew it would harm Egypt. But to maintain her ability to speak with the god, she desperately sought the orders the god wanted. But unexpectedly, she discovered a terrible truth. The god was Egypt's greatest enemy. The girl who spoke with the god was just a spy used by the Hittites. With a sliver of hope, Yamunara pleaded with her brother to tell her it wasn't true. However, she was met with Bifida's unprecedented rage. He dismissed everyone from the room and declared that everyone present must forget what had happened. Anyone who leaked the information would be executed without mercy. Looking at his remorseful sister kneeling on the ground, Bifidu asked Yamunara with concern if there was anything else she was hiding from him. However, when Yamunara looked up and saw Ivy behind Bifidu, she seemed to no longer regret what she had done. Over the years, she had dealt with all the women around Befitu. Those her brother had favored were no longer needed. Those her brother had married, he didn't love. Those her brother loved were not worthy to stand by his side. They all deserved to die. Yamunara believed that even if she was no longer the girl who could speak with the god, she was still the one who deserved to be by Befitu's side. Suddenly, Yamunara drew a dagger and lunged at Ivy. Because even if she covered her ears and refused to listen, or clouded her mind and refused to think, as long as this blonde girl was still breathing, Yamunara felt that no matter what she did, her beloved brother, the pharaoh, wouldn't care. She raised her bloodstained hands. With her last breath, she would curse Ivy and Befitu, condemning them to be forever apart. Just a short while ago, Yamunara had suddenly drawn a dagger and lunged at Ivy. She knew that as long as this blonde girl lived, she would never have her brother's love. In a split second, Befitu blocked Yamunara's dagger with his bare hand. However, before anyone could react, something even more unexpected happened. Buka, without hesitation, ran his sword through Yamunara's body. Minta was shocked and questioned Buka's actions. He couldn't understand why his younger brother would attack the princess so ruthlessly. Buka, with a resolute gaze, declared that attacking the pharaoh was treason, a crime punishable by death, even for royalty. Ivy also couldn't understand why Buka had become so merciless. Now, all she could do was plead with Buka not to remove the sword. Otherwise, Yamunara would bleed to death instantly. But at this moment, Yamunara seemed indifferent to life and death. To her, death was merely a passage from this world to the next. She wasn't afraid of dying, but she was afraid of never seeing her beloved brother again. If that were to be the case, she at least hoped her brother wouldn't forget her. Yamunara suddenly began to laugh hysterically. Ignoring Befitu's pleas, she resolutely pulled the sword from her body. Blood gushed out uncontrollably. Her hands were stained crimson. Yamunara raised her blood-soaked hands and, with her dying breath, cursed Ivy. Nefertari, I curse you to be separated from him, as I am. I curse you to be worthless in his eyes, just like me. Unless that person dies for you, this curse will never be lifted. Yamunara's curse enraged Befitu. He warned her to be silent and speak no more. In her final moments, Yamunara could only look sorrowfully at the love of her life, furious with her for another woman. She reached out and grasped Befitu's hand. The dagger embedded in it was a gift he had given her when they were children. Now, Yamunara pulled the dagger from her brother's hand. Remember, only you can kill me. It is your cruelty that kills me. With that, Yamunara ended her own life without hesitation. Befitu was too late to stop her and could only watch helplessly. Yamunara lay in a pool of blood. She hated this world, a world where her brother didn't love her. Ramesses, too, had lost everything. His beloved sister, deceived and manipulated, had died tragically before his eyes. His loyal friend was now under suspicion. He had lost both love and life. Unexpectedly, a seemingly playful jest by Yari had led to Befitu's utter ruin. 3 days had passed since that day, and Ivy hadn't seen Befitu. As usual, she was trying on various wedding dresses. The priestess's words were making her drowsy. Suddenly, Ivy excused herself and slipped out of the room. She was worried that Befitu, like after Ridika's death, would resort to self-harm to suppress his pain. Arriving at the pharaoh's chambers, Ivy expected Befitu to bar her entry as he had done before. However, he had already instructed the guards to allow her direct access. Ivy realized then that Befitu had been waiting for her. He sat alone in a chair, gazing into the distance. His desolate figure made Ivy's heart ache. Was this the ending she had always desired? After all the speculation, suspicion, and turmoil, it had all been reduced to a trivial farce. Ivy embraced Befitu from behind. She had returned to this time to correct history and save his life, but so many questions remained unanswered. She wasn't even sure if she had succeeded in saving him. Ivy had intended to comfort Befitu, but she found herself weeping instead. Befitu drew her in front of him and gently wiped away her tears. Befitu, no longer dwelling on the past, asked Ivy about herself. He wanted to know everything about her. Ivy couldn't help but smile. After all, it wasn't something she could explain in a few simple words. Ivy began to describe aspects of modern society. He also mentioned that he had written about Ramesses II, a great monarch who led Egypt to prosperity. When the topic of Ramesses II having over 100 concubines and descendants came up, Befitu frowned slightly. He pulled Ivy close, embracing her, and promised that from now on, she would be his only concubine, and he would have as many children as she could bear. Hearing this, Ivy returned his embrace tightly. From the moment she decided to stay, she had resolved to ignore how history might change. So, whether Befitu acted like a child, begging her not to leave, or declared that he would become more ruthless in the power struggles to come, Ivy's heart would not change. No matter what happened, she would always stay by Befitu's side. A man traveled a great distance to the ruins of Memphis. There's an old legend that anyone who drinks from a Nile will return to Egypt. The moment Aicien took another step forward, the desolate ruins became bustling with noise. The surrounding crowd chanted the names of Ramesses and Nefertari. Aicien stared in disbelief at the scene before her. Then, something even more unexpected happened. Two people in elegant clothing walked out of the main hall. One of them was her missing sister. She walked easily alongside an unfamiliar man. Aicien couldn't imagine what would happen next. The guide's call pulled Aicien back to reality from the vision. She found it hard to believe that such a vivid scene was merely an illusion. Leaving the guide behind, she walked alone into the ruins. She knew that the secret of Ivy's disappearance must be hidden within. Aicien arrived at an old shop. It was here that she had bought the bracelet she gave to Ivy. She wanted to know more about the bracelet. The man didn't answer directly, but instead began to tell a story. Over 100 years ago, four young Englishmen came here. They bought the mummy of an ancient Egyptian princess. Unexpectedly, misfortune befell each of the buyers. Later, the mummy was donated to the British Museum. Disasters began to occur there as well. Helpless, the mummy was placed on a giant ship bound for New York. However, the ship, along with 1,500 passengers, sank in the Atlantic. That ship was the famous Titanic, and the mummy's name was Yaminara. Although the story sounded interesting, Aicien wasn't captivated, because the curse of Princess Yaminara had long been confirmed as a rumor. She was merely a priestess of Ammonius who had been mistakenly poisoned. Aicien stopped the man from continuing to fabricate these boring stories to sell his goods. She stated that she wasn't there to buy anything today. However, there was one thing Aicien had gotten wrong. This shop sold only one item, the serpent-shaped gold bracelet. Hearing this, Aicien immediately questioned the man why he had chosen to sell that particular bracelet to her. She even pulled out a gun and pointed it at him. The man wasn't frightened. He continued, saying that while the ridiculous story was indeed a rumor, the four young Englishmen who had bought the mummy were real. One was hit by a car and died, one died in war, and one died of serious illness. The last one walked into the vast desert, never to be seen again, and the man was that last person. He had been guarding Yaminara's mummy for 117 years. He couldn't die, nor could he leave this room. In all these years, Aicien was the only person to enter. He thought that if Aicien took the bracelet, the curse on him would be lifted. But he hadn't expected Aicien to have a blonde, blue-eyed sister. Just then, a voice echoed in Aicien's mind, calling the name Nefertari. The man panicked and knelt before the mummy's coffin, begging the princess for forgiveness. Then a figure emerged from the coffin. Simultaneously, she uttered curses against Nefertari. It was Yaminara, the princess who had died 3,000 years ago. This girl, who emerged from the mummy's coffin, was once the beloved sister of Pharaoh Ramesses II. After sleeping for 3,000 years, she awoke for revenge. This eerie scene made Aicien apprehensive and tense. For a moment, Yaminara froze. The man before her looked exactly like the one who had used and stolen her happiness, Yerianer. And what's even more ridiculous is that he's now that woman's brother. Yaminara couldn't help but burst into laughter. Aicien had no memory of her past life, so she didn't understand what the monstrous girl in front of her was talking about. Her intuition told her that the other person was dangerous. So, she fired a shot at Yaminara's arm. But Yaminara's arm completely detached from her body, fell to the ground, and instantly turned to ashes. Then, Yaminara, ignoring the multiple bullets Aicien fired, approached her directly. For so many years, she had been guarding guarding the golden bracelet, waiting for the blonde-haired girl to appear so she could kill her. But she never expected that the man would sell the bracelet to someone else. Aicien had no idea what Yamunara was talking about. All she knew was that the golden bracelet had taken Ivy away from this world. This, in turn, confused Yamunara. Could it be that she was the one who sent Nefertari to her brother's side? When she heard the name Nefertari, Aicien felt a sense of familiarity. She had mentioned this name when discussing Ramesses II's favorite concubine with Ivy. Upon hearing this, Yamunara suddenly started shouting like a madwoman. She would never acknowledge that woman as her brother's concubine. Yamunara raised her right hand, and the surrounding air began to grow strange. The man on the ground then said, "The golden bracelet is the nexus of space-time. As long as the golden bracelet disappears, this absurd space-time will also disappear." After speaking, the man dissipated into the strange air. Yamunara continued her movements, and the surrounding space-time seemed to distort. Sleeping for 3,000 years, she waited for an opportunity, and this hateful man before her could be that opportunity. "Rejoice, Yeriner. I will send you to your beloved sister now. Memphis, spanning 3,000 years, please grant my request. Let this cruel man taste the bitterness of pain. Let him propel my curse." Before Aicien could react, a strange light carried her away from this space-time. "Will you be the wife of Egypt's greatest pharaoh?" Before a wall of roses made of gold, Befitu whispered in Ivy's ear, asking her to be his queen. To give Ivy a romantic proposal, Befitu disregarded local customs and brought her here at the last moment before the wedding ceremony. Ivy's mind was in a whirl. She hurriedly pushed Befitu away and fled to the side. To hide her shyness, Ivy blushed and said that where she came from, proposals required kneeling on one knee. Befitu thought, what strange rituals. In their Egypt, people only knelt before Ammonius Ra because the god had given them everything, and no one had ever dared to ask the pharaoh to kneel. Ivy also realized that she had gone too far with her nonsense. But just as she turned to explain, Befitu had already knelt on one knee before Ivy and the shimmering wall of roses. For Ivy, he was willing to do anything. He took Ivy's hand and asked her to be his only wife. Ivy hadn't expected that Befitu, the greatest pharaoh of Egypt, would go to such lengths for her. Tears welled up in Ivy's eyes. She threw herself into Befitu's arms and said from the bottom of her heart, "I am willing to abandon the future and stay here forever. I am willing to be your wife and always stay by your side." They embraced beneath the wall of roses until the wedding ceremony officially began. Ancient Nile River, great Ammonius Ra, please bear witness to this great love. From this moment on, Befitu was Ivy's wise husband, and she would be his only wife. However, at this romantic moment, strange thunder suddenly appeared in the sky above. The cheering crowd below all turned into motionless wooden figures. Then, a bolt of lightning struck beside Ivy. Accompanied by Yamunara's curse, a person suddenly emerged from a crack in space-time. For a moment, Ivy thought the man before her was Yeriner, but she immediately realized that it was her brother, Aicien. Ivy quickly stopped Befitu, who was drawing his sword, and explained that it wasn't Yari, but her brother. But with the sound of a gunshot, Befitu instantly collapsed in a pool of blood. Then, disregarding Ivy's wishes, Aicien forcibly pulled her into the space-time rift. They had drunk the waters of the Nile, promising each other they would never be apart. It was their promise that couldn't bridge the chasm torn by space-time. Everything unfolded as Yamunara had cursed. Her endless hatred pierced through 3,000 years of Memphis space-time, becoming the curse that kept Ivy and Befitu forever apart. The supreme pharaoh of Egypt was to marry a girl who had traveled through time from the modern era. Their future seemed so bright. Yet, under Yamunara's curse, everything turned to dust. Her boundless hatred brought Aicien to ancient Egypt. She not only shot and wounded Befitu, but also forcibly brought Ivy back to the present. When Ivy woke up again, she was lying in a hospital bed. She immediately checked her phone and learned that Befitu's history had reverted to its original course. Ramesses II not only lived to be over 90 years old, but also married over 200 concubines throughout his life. His most beloved was Nefertari, the high priestess of Ammonius Ra. Their images adorned various murals and temples. Ivy was relieved that Befidu had lived a long life, yet she couldn't bring herself to feel happy, because history recorded nothing about her. Had Befidu no longer needed her. Ivy looked at her brother, filled with sorrow. "Brother, I'll never see him again." From then on, Ivy became quiet and withdrawn. No matter how kind AICN was to her, whether preparing delicious food or giving expensive gifts, Ivy couldn't help but remember the promises Befidu had made to her. Just then, a news report on television caught her attention. It featured the Rose Courtyard. That was where Befidu had proposed to Ivy. She wanted to go back there. The answers she sought must be there. AICN didn't understand why Ivy had become like this. She embraced Ivy, begging her to stop thinking about that man. She said she could make the same promises to Ivy. This person, connected to her by blood, how infatuated Ivy had once been with him. Befidu's history no longer included her. But Ivy pushed AICN away, because she had promised Befidu that she would always stay by his side. Seeing Ivy's unwavering resolve, AICN didn't try to stop her again. Instead, she chose to accompany Ivy to Memphis. Although the Nile still flowed tirelessly onward, the kingdom that had once been more glorious than the sun was no more. Ivy ran among the crumbling ruins. Even though this place had been weathered by 3,000 years of wind and rain, becoming unrecognizable, she still found that wall at once. In that era without roses, this was the best proof of her existence. Suddenly, Ivy was drawn to a particular stone. She had once told Befidu that the flower represented Ivy's name, and the heart shape represented love. The combined symbols meant Ivy loves. This was Befidu's longing for her. She didn't believe that Befidu, feeling this way, would easily break their vows and marry hundreds of concubines as history dictated. Just then, the loose stone fell. Unexpectedly, the serpent-shaped gold bracelet was hidden inside. This was Ivy's key to traveling through time. In the world 3,000 years later, the young woman once again found the rose wall left for her by the pharaoh. This place bore witness to the promise between Ivy and Befidu. She unexpectedly discovered the gold bracelet hidden within the wall. This was the crucial key to Ivy's journey through time. Ivy's brother, AICN, already realized what she intended to do. Although the wall was weathered by time, the sentiment contained within each flower was still visible. AICN understood. That man must have cherished and protected Ivy just as she did. He also understood that Ivy's heart had no room for anyone else. He gently kissed Ivy's hand and promised that no matter where she went, he would always be by her side, just like now, to protect her. Having said this, AICN turned away with a heavy heart. He reminded Ivy that the gold bracelet was the link between time and space. As long as the bracelet disappeared, the distorted timeline would return to normal. Ivy then vanished in a flash of light. She found herself back in the vast desert. Looking at the cracks on the gold bracelet, she thought, this bracelet will probably break after one more use. Ivy looked around. She couldn't tell where she was. A caravan happened to be passing by. The leader told her they were in Syria, only half a day's journey from the capital, Damascus. After confirming that she was indeed back in Egypt and that Ramesses II was still pharaoh, Ivy finally felt relieved. The man curiously asked if her blonde hair and blue eyes were real. After Ivy confirmed, the man hesitated for a moment, then gifted her a camel. He told her that if she kept heading southwest, past the Red Sea, she would reach Lower Egypt. However, Ivy learned from him that it was already the 5th year of Ramesses II's reign. One 5-year period after another, from the day they met, had felt like only a brief moment to Ivy. Yet, 10 years had passed here. Ivy couldn't imagine the consequences of this time difference. She only wished to return to Befidu's side as soon as possible. However, she soon ran into trouble. A group of soldiers were chasing a man ahead. The iron swords they carried were a symbol of the Hittites in this era. By the time Ivy turned to flee, it was too late. She fell to the ground, and her headscarf slipped off. When the soldiers saw Ivy's blonde hair, they immediately realized that she was likely the girl Yari had been searching for. They also noticed that the camel was Minta's mount. Ivy hadn't expected Yari to be looking for her, nor did she expect the kind caravan leader to be a Hittite soldier. She was now further and further away from Egypt. Ivy's heart was filled with unease and guilt. Would she ever be able to see Befidu again? The young woman traveled through time to the world 3,000 years ago again to meet the pharaoh. During Ivy's brief absence, another 5 years had passed here. Even worse, she might not be able to see Bifidu upon her return, as she was immediately captured by Yari's men. Upon seeing Yari again, Ivy still saw the shadow of her brother in him, but he was ultimately just the Hittite monarch, Yarioner. She only told Yari that she had gone home for the past 5 years, without specifying where. Although Yari was curious why Ivy's appearance hadn't changed at all, he didn't intend to pry, because seeing Ivy again today made him realize something. A man persistently searching for a woman he had only met a few times, and after 5 years, still maintaining his initial interest, just by caressing her cheek, evoked an indescribable emotion. He now only desired Ivy. Nothing else mattered. Ivy hurriedly pushed Yari away. She said she was already the queen of Egypt and couldn't return to the Hittite kingdom with him. However, Yari advised Ivy not to hold on to hope for Egypt, as Damascus had already fallen to the Hittites. As the most important strategic point between the two countries, Syria's fall would put Egypt in a very passive position. Ivy didn't understand why Bifidu was still passively waiting in Memphis. Yari then told Ivy even more shocking news. Ramesses II had never married a queen. Egypt had also forgotten the blonde, blue-eyed Nefertari. Even if Ivy returned now, she couldn't be his queen. Ivy didn't believe it. Even if the whole world forgot her, she didn't believe Bifidu would forget their beautiful vows, unless she saw it with her own eyes. Yari didn't stop Ivy, but chose to accompany her to Egypt. However, he proposed a wager. If that person truly didn't need her anymore, she would have to return to the Hittite kingdom with him wholeheartedly. They decided to leave immediately that day. Unlike the anxious Ivy, Yari seemed exceptionally happy during the journey. The stars in the sky looked as beautiful as gems. Ivy couldn't quite understand Yari. As the Hittite monarch, was it really okay for him to leave like this? Yari still acted indifferent towards Hutti because he wasn't a Hittite at all. He was Canaanite, or as some called them, Phoenician. Ivy, of course, knew of this people. They were the first maritime superpower in human history, possessing brilliant minds and excelling in trade and commerce. Yet, Yari hadn't become a great merchant. It was all because the foolish son of the Hittite king was dissatisfied with the goods they delivered. His parents died at the king's hand because of this. Yari only controlled the Hittite empire from behind the scenes to avenge his parents. He never cared about Hutti's future. Yari revealed his true origins to Ivy. He was from the seafaring Phoenician people. However, he was only adopted by his parents. He didn't know his true birthplace. Since childhood, he had been ostracized by his people because of his blue eyes. Whether in Phoenicia or Hutti, he never felt a sense of belonging, until the day he met Ivy, who had the same eyes. For the first time, Yari felt he wasn't alone. From then on, he had the idea of taking Ivy away. If you're willing to be with me, I can give up my country, power, and money. I can go anywhere with you. Faced with Yari's heartfelt confession, Ivy shyly turned her head away. Yari didn't care if his confession was reciprocated. He simply wanted to tell Ivy what was in his heart. She wished this journey could continue forever. Although she deliberately chose the slowest camels, Damascus was still too close to Memphis. After 3 days of travel, they quickly arrived in Memphis. Yari told Ivy to follow his lead. They would now pretend to be siblings, merchants fleeing from Syria. When Ivy heard Yari call her real name, she again had the illusion that he was her brother. Yari told Ivy not to daze out. Their wager was to confirm whether Egypt had forgotten her. They randomly chose the passing woman. Using his assumed identity, Yari asked her for directions, his handsome face uttering cheesy pickup lines. The woman immediately blushed crimson. Ivy, watching from his side, felt like she was going to throw up. She interrupted their conversation and asked the question she most wanted to know: how is Nefertari doing now? The woman told Ivy they had arrived at the perfect time. The pharaoh would marry Nefertari next month as his first wife. Coupled with her status as Egypt's foremost prophetess, she would surely bring prosperity to the nation. Ivy was stunned into silence. She knew who the woman was referring to, but she still couldn't believe it. She excitedly grabbed the woman's hand, pressing her for information about the blonde Nefertari. However, the woman seemed resistant, repeatedly saying she didn't know and hadn't heard of such a person. With that, the woman fled. Unwilling to give up, Ivy chased her to a corner. After repeated pleas, the woman finally told Ivy the truth. Years ago, the pharaoh had decreed the erasure of the blonde girl from the nation's memory. All related sculptures, portraits, and documents were destroyed. Anyone who dared mention her would have their tongue cut out, because during the wedding 5 years ago, the pharaoh was injured and the blonde girl mysteriously vanished. Strangely, no one saw what happened, but the ministers all agreed that the blonde girl had harmed the pharaoh. Although a similar incident had occurred 10 years prior, this time was different. This time, she had harmed the pharaoh before the god Amuniasare. Now, Egypt had forgotten its would-be queen. Upon hearing this, Ivy nearly fainted. Had she endured so much to return to ancient Egypt only to confirm that all of Befidu's vows to her had vanished like bubbles? Would the supreme pharaoh of Egypt wait 10 years for a modern girl? To find an answer, Ivy had painstakingly returned to ancient Egypt, but their past vows had been ruthlessly washed away by time. Befidu was going to marry the real Nefertari as his first wife, and there was no longer a place for her here. An unknown amount of time passed. Ivy sat in a daze before Yari. When she came to her senses, she realized she was surrounded by Hittite soldiers, their backs to the setting sun, moving away from Memphis. Yari told Ivy she had lost, and now the war was about to begin. Even if Ivy was unwilling, he would take her back to Hutti. He didn't want to see her suffer any harm. This reminded Ivy of her brother. He had promised that no matter when or where, he would always be by her side to protect her. In this ancient world, only this man, who looked just like her brother, still cared about her. Only this man, with the same eyes as hers, could understand her pain. For a moment, Ivy considered staying. But when the golden bracelet suddenly began to glow and heat up, memories, as scorching as the sun, flooded back into her mind. Ivy's gaze hardened. Regardless of whether Befidu still had any feelings for her, she had to see him with her own eyes. Ivy snatched Yari's knife and held it to her own throat, even going so far as to draw blood. She begged Yari to let her return to Memphis, threatening to die there otherwise. Yari, his expression filled with sorrow, pleaded with Ivy not to hurt herself. He begged her to put down the knife first, otherwise their horses couldn't turn around. In Ivy's moment of hesitation, Yari pulled her into his arms. The knife grazed his skin. Seeing this, Ivy immediately dropped the knife. Yari held her tighter. He hadn't expected her to hurt herself for that man. Compared to the pain in his heart, the wound on his body was nothing. Yari agreed to take Ivy back to Memphis. But for now, he just wanted to hold her like this for a while. Later, Yari took Ivy to Memphis without stopping. As they neared their destination, Yari gave Ivy a final warning. If she lost this time, she had to obediently return with him. Otherwise, no matter where she hid, he would find her and take her away by any means necessary. Ivy had never actually considered what she would do if she lost the wager. She had only wanted to use this wager to return to Befidu's side. At first, she firmly believed that if they saw each other again, Befidu would remember their promise. But along the way, the despair in her heart grew heavier and heavier. If getting close to this man meant potentially losing your luck, would you still be willing to travel through time to ancient Egypt? That day, all of Memphis was unusually lively, because today, Befidu and Nefertari's wedding ceremony would be held here. Ivy and Befidu had once made a promise here to be each other's only one. She had to see for herself whether Befidu had truly broken their promise. When she saw the real Nefertari, Ivy was stunned. She was still so beautiful, and compared to 5 years ago, she had gained an air of grace and nobility. She was Ramesses II's rightful queen. Compared to her, Ivy felt she didn't even have the right to stand beside him. She thought perhaps she really should accept reality. Just then, the crowd erupted in even louder cheers. Their greatest pharaoh had arrived. Befidu, mounted on his steed, wore his symbolic peacock green attire. He was still the same scorching son of the sun god from the desert 5 years ago. Ivy finally saw the figure that had appeared countless times in her memories. Everything seemed unchanged. She couldn't help but want to call out Befidu's name. However, her longing didn't reach Befidu. Yari covered Ivy's mouth and told her to be quiet. Too many people in Egypt wanted her dead. Befidu was right in front of her, yet Ivy felt the greatest distance between them. She desperately wanted to ask him one question. Even if she was hated by everyone or abandoned by the gods, she was willing to bear any punishment. Ivy turned and apologized to Yari, guilt evident in her voice. Then, Shouting that Hittites were chasing her, she rushed out of the crowd, disregarding everything. She believed Yari would protect her, just like her brother. She thought how happy she would be if the person she loved was Yari. Perhaps both she and Yari had lost this time, because for this man before her, Ivy was even willing to give up her life. The guards reported to Befitu that Ivy was being chased by Hittites. Befitu ordered them to control the agitated crowd first. He instructed them to bring the troublemakers back to the palace to await questioning. With that, he left the scene. Ivy was then brought into the palace. The old vizier, Heman, was interrogating her, but Ivy said the matter was of vital importance. She had to report it to the pharaoh personally. Heman sneered. He said if Ivy didn't speak now, she would never speak again. Then he ordered the guards to lock Ivy in the dungeon to await execution. Just at that moment, Befitu arrived. He asked Heman who gave him the audacity to interrogate a prisoner privately. He believed Ivy's information might be important. Befitu proceeded to his throne and told Ivy to raise her head and speak. His voice was so quiet that Ivy felt he could hear even the slightest sound she made. She couldn't imagine what would happen if Befitu recognized her. Would she be killed? Or something else? Seeing Ivy hesitate to speak, Befitu lost his patience. He ordered the guards to take her away. Ivy thought that if she missed this opportunity, there might not be another. There was so much she wanted to say to the man before her. The young woman saw once again the son of the sun god, who had appeared countless times in her memories. This might be their last chance to meet. So Ivy cried out Befitu's name. When Befitu heard the voice that had once haunted his dreams, he instantly lost his usual composure. With mixed emotions, he lifted the silk scarf from Ivy's head. When the golden hair cascaded down, everyone was shocked. For in Egypt, a golden-haired girl had long since become an omen of death. Anyone who dared to mention it would have their tongue cut out, and anyone who dared to imitate it would be executed without exception. This was a decree personally issued by the pharaoh. 5 years had passed, and Befitu finally saw Ivy again. He scoffed, thinking it was no wonder he couldn't find her all these years. She had been hiding with Yari. Seeing that Befitu misunderstood her relationship with Yari, Ivy immediately tried to explain. She had risked escaping and returning to tell Befitu that the Hittite army was already at the border of Egypt and Syria. Befitu didn't show any gratitude. Instead, he mocked Ivy, asking who she thought she was, returning from Hutti and immediately meddling in Egyptian affairs. He furiously grabbed Ivy's hair and asked why, after 5 years, she chose this time and this place to return. Did it have nothing to do with Yari? Old Heman added fuel to the fire, warning Befitu to be wary of this woman, suggesting she could be a spy sent by Yari. Ivy couldn't believe she was so misunderstood. She had only returned because she wanted Befitu to be safe. However, Befitu's response was still cold. Not just anyone is qualified to wish for my safety. In my eyes, you are as worthless as the sand in the desert. Yamunara's curse seemed to have come true. At this moment, something within Ivy shattered. The faint belief that had always been in her heart. The belief that had supported her reckless journey through time to return to Befitu's side now vanished. Ivy fought back tears, telling herself not to cry. To someone who no longer cared, tears would only add to their burden. Finally, Ivy only reminded Befitu once more that while he was marrying his queen, Hutti would certainly attack Egypt. 5 years ago, she had let Yari go, causing an irreversible situation. Now, she would tell Egypt about Hutti's movements as a small compensation. Having said this, Ivy turned and walked unsteadily towards the door. But at this moment, Befitu suddenly picked Ivy up. He angrily asked how long she planned to disappear this time. 5 years, 10 years, or forever. Ivy told Befitu that she hadn't planned on leaving again after returning this time. She had found the bracelet hidden in the rose wall in the world 3,000 years later. Even though history had returned to its original course, she still wanted to come back here. Because Befitu, I love you. I just wanted to see you. But this rushed confession of love couldn't mend the pain Befitu had endured all these years. He hated that Ivy spoke of love while repeatedly breaking her vows. All these years, no matter how sincerely he prayed to the heavens, he couldn't find her. In the end, it was a Hittite who brought her back. Befitu kicked opened the bedroom door. He wanted Ivy to prove her love for him. He was the great pharaoh of Egypt, revered by all under the sun. Yet, there was one thing that always terrified him, losing the young woman before him. Ivy had repeatedly broken and forgotten their vows. Befitto wanted Ivy to experience his pain. He thought that this way, Ivy would never forget him. After that agonizing, heart-wrenching night, in her daze, Ivy heard a familiar voice. The source of the voice was the angelically beautiful Nefertari. Ivy wondered if she was dead. Then, both Heman and Princess Hennetai appeared. Nefertari was alive. Years ago, she had immersed herself in the study and experimentation with various poisons. Her body had developed a certain resistance. Everyone had thought she was dead. When she was sent to the House of the Dead to be mummified, she regained her breath at the last moment and came back to life. However, the poisoning left her with lasting effects. She would spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. But she wasn't sad, because she had gained something far more important. They were no longer Egypt's first prophet and Pharaoh's consort, but simply a happy, ordinary couple. It was His Majesty's kindness that brought them together. Heman and Hennetai were deeply grateful for this. Nothing could have reassured Ivy more. She had felt incredibly guilty, believing her presence had harmed them. But Ivy couldn't understand why Befittu was so kind to his subjects, yet disregarded her own wishes and tormented her like a madman. Nefertari wanted Ivy to believe that Befittu didn't truly want to hurt her. Befittu had told Nefertari about Ivy coming from the future. He frantically built temples, sculptures, and left written records. Also that 3,000 years later, Ivy would remember that someone was waiting for her here. But days turned into weeks, and still no miracle occurred. He feared Ivy would never return. He feared he wouldn't live to see that day. This was the great pharaoh's only fear. Thinking of Befittu's lonely, waiting figure, Ivy couldn't help but cry. But she still didn't understand why Befittu had erased her existence and married another Nefertari. Nefertari told her that it was all a ruse. The purpose was to deliberately mislead the nations surrounding Egypt, making the Hittites think they had an opportunity to strike and severely weaken them. Perhaps Befittu's only concern was that if Ivy returned and saw all this, would she still come back to him? In truth, Befittu had never forgotten their vows. Ivy was the queen of Egypt, his one and only wife. Befittu hadn't forgotten their vows. Ivy was the queen of Egypt, his only wife. Marrying Nefertari was just a ploy to deceive the enemy. Ivy had misunderstood Befittu. After 5 years of separation, the truly cruel one was herself. Ivy wanted to see Befittu now, but he had already led 3 army divisions to Syria to confront the Hittite army. Ivy immediately realized this was the world-renowned Battle of Kadesh. According to historical records, it was a perilous battle. Ramesses II, due to false intelligence, fell into a Hittite ambush. Fortunately, another division of his troops arrived in time and helped him escape the predicament. Ivy remembered the name of that division, the Ta division. She immediately asked Nefertari about the current status of that division, saying that they had to depart immediately to support the front lines or Befittu's life would be in danger. Nefertari could see that Ivy truly loved His Majesty. They were 2 people clearly in love, yet toyed with by fate, constantly hurting each other. Like 2 hedgehogs yearning for warmth, the closer they got, the more they pricked each other. Nefertari told Ivy that the Ta division, renowned for its defensive capabilities among the 4 divisions, served as the kingdom's last line of defense and was currently stationed in Memphis. And the commander of this army was none other than Heman. Although he too longed to lead the division and fight alongside the pharaoh, he was currently unable to. Ivy once again felt responsible for Heman's situation. He's the reason Heman couldn't be by Befittu's side. But this legion is truly too important. Without their strength, Befittu might really die this time. Could it be her presence that changed history again? While Ivy was still drowning in self-blame, Heman showed her a way. Although she could no longer lead the army into battle, Ivy could take her place at the pharaoh's side. Matho-Hidru also came to Ivy's former self, begging her to lead this legion to protect the pharaoh. Heman told Ivy not to worry about staying behind. If the pharaoh were truly defeated, they wouldn't live on here either. Their happiness was granted by the pharaoh. Their loyalty would always be his. If he unfortunately left this world, they would follow him to the next, continuing to serve him. Heman handed the token and the task of protecting the pharaoh to Ivy. Matho-Hidru also presented Ivy with battle attire. Ivy sincerely apologized to and thanked Heman. She thought, since coming to this man's side was destined, then she couldn't be lost in confusion about changing history anymore. Ivy prepared to advance. This time, she would fight to protect Befidu. She raised the token, ordering the entire Ta Legion to immediately advance towards Kadesh. This was the most famous battle of Kadesh in Egyptian history, led by Ramesses II himself, marching north to fight for control of Syria. Initially, the pharaoh's 3 legions advanced triumphantly, until, while crossing the Orontes River, they were ambushed by the Hittite army. The Ra legion at the front was already routed. Befidu led the Ammonius legion, struggling to hold on. But the last legion, the Set legion, for some unknown reason, remained at the rear. The one who commanded the Set legion and told him there were no Hittite troops guarding the front was Mutemwia. A terrifying thought suddenly flashed through Befidu's mind. Even worse, at this moment, a black flag was raised at the front. It was Yerioner, arriving with his main force. He waved his hand, and his soldiers charged forward relentlessly. Befidu fought valiantly. He struck down enemy after enemy, even with multiple deep wounds on his body. He never stopped wielding his sword. The desire to live and return to Ivy's side was the belief that kept him from falling. Even Yerioner couldn't help but admire his persistence. But it was ultimately a futile struggle. He still had 8,000 soldiers on the other side of the river. These were meant to deal with the pharaoh's highly capable Set legion. However, he hadn't expected that legion wouldn't come to support the front lines at all. That's why Ramesses had fallen into such a dire situation. The Hittites were determined to win this war. For years, Heman had been betraying Egypt, selling intelligence to the Hittites. Because Ramesses still had no heir as long as he died, Heman was confident he could help his son-in-law, the 4th prince, seize the throne. Therefore, the Hittites were willing to sacrifice Yaminara to protect Heman, their strongest asset. And Yari had seen through the recent wedding as a mere ruse from the beginning, because he firmly believed that man's love for the blonde girl wouldn't be easily forgotten. So he had the successor of Zidahar harass the Egyptian border. Now, the opportunity to defeat this man was right before his eyes. Yerioner ordered Tudhalia to keep the 8,000 soldiers on the other side of the river. He wanted to fairly defeat Ramesses himself and then capture him alive. However, at this moment, a figure holding a battle flag high suddenly descended upon the battlefield under the setting sun. It was Ivy, arriving with the Ta Legion just in time. According to historical records, during the Battle of Kadesh, Ramesses II was in dire straits. Just as he was about to be defeated, the Ta Legion arrived. They brought Ramesses II a lifeline. Egypt rallied, using their familiar phalanx formation to repel the Hittite chariot army. Ivy rushed to Befidu's side without hesitation. Befidu opened his arms, wanting to embrace her. But what she received was a slap from Ivy. Before Befidu could ask the question in his heart, Ivy hugged him tightly again. She cried, lamenting that Befidu had abandoned her. She wanted him to live a long and healthy life, to stay by her side forever. Befidu was stunned, speechless, 1,000 complex emotions flashing through his eyes. When every reunion means another separation, can you still believe in the promise of never being apart? To save Befidu's life, to be with him forever, Ivy brought the last of Egypt's strength here. His promise was so beautiful that Befidu could hardly believe it. But no matter how many times, he would still choose to believe in Ivy. On this sunset-lit battlefield, they promised to be together forever. Compared to their beautiful promise, Yerioner seemed very lonely. But he knew that no matter how much he loved her, Ivy's heart had no room for anyone else. He thought that if there was an afterlife, he wished Ivy could also feel the pain of unrequited love. Even if only for a brief moment, he hoped Ivy could fall in love with him. Yerioner silently raised his right hand and ordered his soldiers, who were grappling with the Egyptian legions, to retreat. Everyone raised their bows and arrows to shoot the Egyptians. Facing imminent death, Ivy's eyes were filled with determination. As long as she could be with Befidu, she wasn't afraid to die here. They would no longer have misunderstandings, nor would they have any more pain. Befidu gently stroked Ivy's head. As long as I'm here, you won't die. Then Befidu raised his right hand. In his hand was a token gleaming with golden light. Immediately, a a long sword was placed against Yerioner's neck. It turned out Tudhalia was an Egyptian spy. Yerioner hadn't expected to be caught off guard. He recalled the time Tudhalia appeared before him exactly 5 years ago, around the time he returned from Egypt. Then, a while ago, Ivy riding his camel back to Egypt, and just now, him disregarding his 8,000 soldiers on the other side of the river and rushing here. None of this was a coincidence, because it was all for his true master, whom he served loyally. Yerioner asked Tudhalia with interest, "What are you going to do next?" "Kill me yourself." Tudhalia apologized to Yerioner, full of guilt. "In this life, I am an Egyptian and can only be loyal to the pharaoh. If there's a next life, I am willing to follow you faithfully." With their supreme ruler under control, the Hittite army collapsed and surrendered. Ivy and Befida looked at each other affectionately. After going through so much hardship, could they finally be together this time? However, something unexpected happened. A Hittite soldier raised his bow and arrow. He angrily shouted, "The Egyptian pharaoh must die," and shot the arrow. Ivy instinctively shielded Befidu, seeing the arrow about to pierce Ivy's body. In a flash, Befidu pulled Ivy in front of him, taking the sharp arrow with his unprotected back. Scattered memories flooded in. It was as if Ivy was in a distant dream. She had seen the same terrifying scene before. The moment Befida blocked the arrow for her, fragmented memories surged into her mind. It was as if she had been having a recurring dream since long ago. In the dream, that person doted on her endlessly. They held a grand and magnificent wedding. However, all the happy days eventually led to that tragic ending. Every time, she hoped the dream wouldn't reach its conclusion. With a thud, Befitu collapsed in front of Ivy. Those around them, reacting a moment too late, immediately hacked the attacker to death. It turned out that the man was the reckless, rough brother who had followed Yerioner in the assassination attempt on Befitu. Tudhalia hadn't expected such a person to be mixed into his carefully selected dude. Blood began to pour from Befida's mouth. The arrow may have pierced his lung. Ivy immediately called for the army physician. However, Befitu grasped Ivy's hand, stopping her. Because the arrowhead is coated with a deadly poison, he wants Ivy to remember his final words. Ivy begs Befidu not to speak. She doesn't want to remember. He can tell her later. But Befida knows his time is running out. He instructs Ivy to immediately lead the Ta Legion back to Egypt and to make good use of Yari for her safety. He warns her to be wary of Mutemwia, who still commands the Set Legion. Befida's hands are growing cold, but he continues giving his final instructions. After his death, the 8th royal son will inherit the throne. Heman is a spy within Egypt. Minta will take care of everything. Ivy only needs to return safely to Egypt. Ivy cries, begging Befitu to stop talking. He is the 3rd pharaoh of the 19th dynasty of Egypt. He has lived for 96 years and built a new city called Pyramus. Ivy tells Befitu this is his history. He won't die here. Befitu gently wipes the tears from Ivy's cheeks. He looks so happy. Meeting and knowing Ivy has been the greatest joy of his life. He is grateful that he could protect Ivy in his final moments. Sadly, he can no longer clearly see her beloved face. "Ivy, I love you, and thank you." With these words, Befitu closes his eyes forever. No matter how Ivy calls to him, he doesn't open them again. At this moment, Yamunara's curse echoes in her ears. "I curse you to be separated from him, just as I was. I curse you to be worthless in his eyes, just as I was. Unless that person dies for you, this curse will never be lifted." At this moment, the curse is finally broken. However, the life of the Egyptian pharaoh has ended. The Nile River and this golden land have witnessed his sunset. At the cost of the pharaoh's life, the curse on the young woman is lifted. But it's all meaningless now. With the fall of the sun, the entire battlefield falls deathly silent, filled only with Ivy's heartbroken cries. Her tears fall onto Befidu. The next moment, a golden light emanates from her body. The source of the light is the cracked gold bracelet. The moment Ivy picks up the bracelet, her entire body begins to glow even brighter. An ancient chant echoes in her mind. The gold bracelet created an illusion of history, traversing endless time and space. The gold bracelet carries too much of the past, has witnessed too much pain. The gold bracelet is the nexus between two times. When the gold bracelet disappears, the illusion of history disappears. Everything returns to zero. everything returns to the beginning. Ivy seems to understand the meaning of the gold bracelet. It brought her to ancient Egypt, creating a false history. If the gold bracelet disappears, everything will return to its original point. Bifida won't die because of her. He will live a long life, as recorded in history, but he will forget every moment with Ivy, because she will no longer exist there. He won't remember their meeting, their love, nor will he remember sacrificing himself to protect her. It will be as if she never existed. He won't remember anything. Ivy longs to stay by Bifidu's side forever, to be his beloved wife, to bear his children. But more than anything, Ivy wants Bifida to live. Even if he forgets her completely, falls in love with another woman, and marries hundreds of concubines, Ivy leans down and kisses Bifidu's still warm lips. "You foolish man, you are the one who swore to leave me first. Live well." With that, Ivy forces back her grief and puts on the gold bracelet. Time and space around her freeze. Only the bracelet continues to emanate a dazzling golden light. Scenes from the past rewind before Ivy's eyes. The first time she traveled through time meant to force her to Bifidu's side. The second time, Heman told her that a person's appearance can change, but the soul within remains the same. And Bifidu, waiting again and again. Promise after promise. Ivy engraved all of this firmly in her heart. In a reversed flow of time, Bifidu came back to life. He immediately realized Ivy was about to leave him again. He desperately cried out, begging Ivy not to leave him. Yet, no amount of love could overcome the emptiness in his hand. They couldn't hold each other's hands. They could only watch each other disappear before their eyes. The torrent of time caused them to be lost in the space of millennia. The failed curse brought them back to the starting point of reality. The golden bracelet disappeared. The illusory history also vanished, and everything returned to zero. Everything returned to the beginning. The Nile, my mother. I drank this water of life with him, promising to remember past lives in future meetings. This is Egypt. A lingering dream haunted the pharaoh's mind. Every day, he had the same dream. The girl in the dream had sky-blue eyes and dazzling golden hair like sunlight. She said her name was Nefertari. But Bifida searched all of Egypt and couldn't find such a girl. He only found a girl with the same name among the concubines bestowed by the previous king. That year, Ramses II ascended the throne, becoming the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty of Egypt. During his 90-plus years of life, he not only brought Egypt to unprecedented heights, but also built many breathtaking temples and sculptures. Even 3,000 years later, they still stand vividly in the world. In a castle in London, England. Today is Ivy's 17th birthday. Her brother, Yari, gave her a special birthday present, a glittering, serpentine gold bracelet. The moment Ivy put on the bracelet, she felt as if she had forgotten something very important. The next moment, the bracelet began to emit a dazzling golden light. After the light dissipated, the bracelet disappeared as well. But a sealed memory emerged in her mind. Those regal amber eyes and those scorching oaths like the sun. At this moment, Ivy remembered everything. She told her brother that she needed to go to Egypt. Yari had never seen such a determined, yet sorrowful look in Ivy's eyes. He promised Ivy that no matter where she wanted to go, he would go with her. As he spoke, Yari felt an inexplicable heartache. He remembered that he had said the same thing before. This time, Ivy still didn't choose him. She decided to go to Egypt alone. Before leaving, she wished Yari happiness because she loved him like a sister loves her brother. Ivy once again set foot on the land blessed by the sun god. Just breathing the air here, Ivy felt like she had returned to the same space-time from thousands of years ago. There was a trace of her presence here. Even if what she saw was his declaration of love to another person, Ivy still wanted to return to his side. Escorting her all the way here were Yari's subordinates. Whether by coincidence or fate, one of them looked exactly like Tut, Yari's subordinate from that time. In this land that believed in reincarnation, Ivy couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Soon, they arrived at the ruins of the temple of Abu Simbel. Across 3,000 years of space-time, the gods in heaven and the people of later generations have witnessed the miracle here. Bifida once told Ivy that no matter where she went or what she became, this was proof of his love. But Ivy didn't know what she was hoping for. This sculpture wasn't him. In that space-time, Bifida didn't have her by his side. All those beautiful memories had disappeared along with the golden bracelet. However, Ivy was surprised to find that she could understand the writing on the steel. It was filled with Ramses' Ipsi's prayers to the Egyptian gods. Ivy looked at the words, filled with longing and disbelief. Who was the person he longed to see again? Was it Nefertari? Just then, someone appeared behind her. The person had the familiar fiery red hair that Ivy knew. Before Ivy could react, she heard a voice behind her, a voice that only appeared in her dreams. Ivy, remember, we drank the water of the Nile together, promising to remember past lives and future meetings. This was the promise of Egypt's supreme pharaoh to a modern girl, transcending time and space.